a trick question. Which of these has the least carbohydrates? This roll of bread, this bowl of rice, or this can of soda? It's a trick question. Although they may differ in fats, vitamins, and other nutritional content, when it comes to carbs, they're pretty much the same. So, what exactly does that mean for your diet? First, first of all, carbohydrate is the nutritional category for sugars and molecules that your body breaks down to make sugars. Carbohydrates can be simple or complex depending on their structure. This is a simple sugar, or monosaccharide. Glucose, fructose, and galactose are all simple sugars. Link two of them together, and you've got a disaccharide: lactose, maltose, or sucrose. Complex carbohydrates, on the other hand, have three or more simple sugars strung together. Complex carbohydrates with 3 to 10 linked sugars are oligosaccharides. Those with more than 10 are polysaccharides. During digestion, your body breaks down those complex carbohydrates into their monosaccharide building blocks, which your cells can use for energy. So when you eat any carbohydrate-rich food, the sugar level in your blood, normally about a teaspoon, goes up. But your digestive tract doesn't respond to all carbohydrates the same. Consider starch and fiber, both polysaccharides, both derived from plants, both composed of hundreds to thousands of monosaccharides joined together. But they're joined together differently, and that changes the effect they have on your body. In starches, which plants mostly store for energy in roots and seeds, glucose molecules are joined together by alpha linkages, most of which can be easily cleaved by enzymes in your digestive tract. But in fiber, the bonds between monosaccharide molecules are beta bonds, which your body can't break down. Fiber can also trap some starches, preventing them from being cleaved, resulting in something called resistant starch. So foods high in starch, like crackers and white bread, are digested easily, quickly releasing a whole bunch of glucose into your blood. Exactly what would happen if you drank something high in glucose, like soda. These foods have a high glycemic index, the amount that a particular food raises the sugar level in your blood. Soda and white bread have a similar glycemic index because they have a similar effect on your blood sugar. But when you eat foods high in fiber, like vegetables, fruits, and whole grains, those indigestible beta bonds slow the release of glucose into the blood. Those foods have a lower glycemic index, and foods like eggs, cheese, and meats have the lowest glycemic index. When sugar moves from the digestive tract to the bloodstream, your body kicks into action to transfer it into your tissues, where it can be processed and used for energy. Insulin, a hormone synthesized in the pancreas, is one of the body's main tools for sugar management. When you eat and your blood sugar rises, insulin is secreted into the blood. It prompts your muscle and fat cells to let glucose in and jumpstarts the conversion of sugar to energy. The degree to which a unit of insulin lowers the blood sugar helps us understand something called insulin sensitivity. The more a given unit of insulin lowers blood sugar, the more sensitive you are to insulin. If insulin sensitivity goes down, that's known as insulin resistance. The pancreas still sends out insulin, but cells, especially muscle cells, are less and less responsive to it. So blood sugar fails to decrease, and blood insulin continues to rise. Chronically consuming a lot of carbohydrates may lead to insulin resistance, and many scientists believe that insulin resistance leads to a serious condition called metabolic syndrome. That involves a constellation of symptoms, including high blood sugar, increased waist circumference, and high blood pressure. It increases the risk of developing conditions like cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, and its prevalence is rapidly increasing all over the world. As much as 32% of the population in the US has metabolic syndrome. So let's get back to your diet. Whether your food tastes sweet or not, sugar is sugar, and too many carbs can be a problem. So maybe you'll want to take a pass on that pasta, sushi roll, pita burrito, donut burger sandwich.
Yan. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Kamusta yung lahat dyan? Okay, so saan na yung ating mga reporters? Okay, so si Lloyd. Hello, Lloyd. Good morning.
Yes,
Bagong
sir.
camera ni Lloyd, no? May bagong camera sa Lloyd. Yan. Okay, so kayo ba mga reporters ngayon, Lloyd?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so nandito na ba ang lahat? I think nasa 20 plus pa lang tayo. Baka nakatulog pa yung iba, no? Ikaw ba ang magpe-present ngayon, Lloyd? Ikaw ba yung magpe-present ng presentation ninyo?
Yes, sir.
Yan, okay. O, shout out daw, Lloyd. Sabi ni Red One. O, sabi ni Red One, shout out daw. Yan, mega shout out to you, Red. Okay, so, um, nakakaon na ba ang tanan? Naka-breakfast na ba? Yan. So, class, nakita niyo na ba yung mga grades ninyo? Nakita niyo na ba ang mga grades? Ikaw, Lloyd, nakita na ni Lloyd?
Yes, sir.
So, Lloyd, um, share mo na yung PowerPoint presentation mo habang hinihintay natin yung iba. Okay, so i-share mo na yun para malagay na natin siya sa share screen. Yan. Okay, so I think yung iba wala pa, no? So kung nandito na ang lahat, pag-isulat naman ng na word na carbohydrates, okay? Carbohydrates, okay? Pag-isulat natin yung word na carbohydrates. Okay? Ito yung link natin, class, ha? Ito yung link natin sa ating StreamYard. Binaba ko na. Charisse Adele, kung good morning. So, kasama mo to, Zoe, si Charisse. Si Roche Bogador. Yan, si Roche kay maputol-putol. Pasok ka balik Roche Bogador kasi napuputol yung connection mo. I think sa connection siguro to. Okay. Charis, anak pa si Kuan, si Red One, shout out na kay Sir Alan sa likod. Yun, shout out na kay Sir Alan sa likod, Charis. Yun. Hi, Yancy. Yan, ang ganda-ganda ng background ni Yancy. Oh, naka-blue screen. Yan. Prepare si Yancy for our online class. Di ba, Yancy? Yan.
Hello, sir.
Prepared na prepared. Tingnan niyo si Yancy. Naka-prepare sa online class. Okay, Okay, Lloyd, paki-share screen mo na yung inyong presentation so that we can already start no our presentation. Kasi class, we need to finish our carbohydrates today. Then after yeah, kasi next meeting Friday, we will be discussing about lipids. Kasi class, i-compute na ako. Happy na din atong exam. O, di ba? Are you excited? Na sila sa ilang exam. Roxy Bugador, I think there are something wrong with your connection siguro. Bakit hindi ka makapasok? Nandito ka lang sa ikikita ha, balik ka, pasok dito sa ating StreamYard. Kasi I think there is something wrong with your connection. Cherries, putol-putol ba akong boses or okay lang? Hello, Lloyd? Can you hear me, Lloyd? Hello? Cherries, marinig mo ko?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Marinig, sir.
Okay. Sige na, i-share nyo
Pero
na yung
medyo
PowerPoint.
putol-putol lang.
Oo. Lagay nyo na yung inyong PowerPoint presentation so that we can start already. Okay? Habang hinihintay
Okay,
yung
sir.
ibang groupmates.
Ano, di ba ito yung question?
Just click the share screen.
Okay, sir. Dikit mo. Sir, hindi. Lagay mo. Share screen.
I-click mo yung share screen, Lloyd.
Ganit, sir. Kinakit ko. Ayan.
Kung may nakita ang square dyan sa baba, just click share screen.
Ganit, sir. Di siya mo.
Sino pang classmate mo na may ibang presentation?
Wait lang, sir.
Yan. Okay, so bago tayo mag-start, class, no? Bago tayo mag-start, so I will be checking first your attendance. Okay? So once I call your name, pakisulat dyan sa ating comment section, hashtag RMT ako 2024. Yan. Okay? Hashtag RMT ako 2024. Okay. Start with Aguirre. Yan. Alburo, Amante, Balsita, Balfermoso, Balyerta, Bisana, Bukog, Kabanyal, Katoliko, Chu, Dait, okay? Bong, De Los Reyes, Ako, Erot, Flores, Yapar, Ginanaw, Jaramillo, Ilocos, Narciso, Lopez, Tuyang, Magunsya, Mangulapnan, Montejo, Rondovio, Roales, Salvacion, Sangkupan, Santa Ana, Talatala, Tipa, Valencia, Veneracion, Yekyek, Zamora, Zarandin, Salazar, Janica, Discatan, and Bogador. Yan. Okay. Na bang ibang may reports ninyo, Lloyd? Sino may copy ng inyong report? Hello, Matthew. Good morning. May copy ka ng report ninyo, Matthew?
Try ko po download, sir. Wait lang.
Okay. Sige. Kasi parang hindi daw makapasok si Lloyd. Patricia Nicole,
Yes,
meron
sir.
ba copy ng inyong presentation?
Hindi ko po na-download, sir ba?
O bakit hindi nyo i-download? Dapat i-download ninyo. Just in case, no? Sino pala ang gumawa ng presentation ninyo kung wala kayong copy?
I mean, sir, hindi ko po na-download sa laptop mo. Sa phone ko lang na-download, sir. Ang file.
Wait lang, sir, na opening na.
Okay. Sige. Okay naman.
Level, sir. Wait lang.
Okay na ba, Matt?
Hello, sir. Makita niyo, sir? Okay na ba?
Yan, okay.
Wala pa.
Yan, sige. Okay na.
Okay na, sir?
Yes, okay na. You can start na, Matt. You can start.
Go, guys. Start na.
Sino ba ang mauna? Si Lloyd?
Wait lang, sir.
Ako na. Sige, ako na lang. Definition lang. Sir, pwede na mag-start.
Yes, you can start na, Lloyd. You can start.
So, good morning, everyone. We are the Group 1, and we're gonna present about carbohydrates. So, carbohydrates are one of the three main classes of foods and a source of energy.
Nawala ba?
Yes.
Oo, ma. Puti lang.
Wait lang, nawala. Wait lang.
Okay.
Oh, no, wait lang.
Yan. Okay na? Patricia Nicole, marinig mo ako, Pat?
Yes po, sir.
Try mo daw download yung presentation ninyo.
Sige po. Sige po.
Mm-mm. Okay naman yun kanina, Matt. Ano yung problem?
Nawawala siya, sir, pag ano. Nawawala siya pag hindi na-share screen ko.
Bakit kaya?
Akin din, sir. Nawala din po, sir, pag share screen. Tsaka naka-screen share ako kanina, sir, para hindi siya makita.
Sir, what if, sir, bigay na lang namin ng PowerPoint tapos ikaw na lang mag-present, sir. Same last time, doon lang ginagawa if mag-report kami.
Sige. Naana ko i-copy sa inyong presentation. Sige, ako na lang mag-share.
Sige po, sir.
Naga-white po siya, sir, pag na-full screen. Nag siya, sir. Pagka next ko, naga-white lang siya. Kaya nawawala.
Yan, nakita niyo na?
Yes, sir. Yes po.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Ano pa?
Pero try nyo lang. Mas better kasi kung kayo ang mag-next kay ma-control ninyo ba? Ma-control ninyo kung mag-next na ba? O sige. Okay na, Lloyd. Next ko na.
Sipat. Sipat
Wait
daw
lang.
mag-ano, sir.
Sige. Ulit, sir, ha? Okay, so first is carbohydrate. So carbohydrate are one of the three main classes of foods and a source of energy. Carbohydrates are mainly sugars and starches that the body breaks down into glucose. So why do we need carbohydrates? Because carbohydrates siya yung body main source of our energy, and carbohydrates, nagha-help siya para ma-fuel yung brain natin, kidneys, heart muscle, and central nervous system. And also, carbohydrates is nagha-help din siya para sa aids natin in digestion and keeps the blood cholesterol levels in check. Next question. So we have classification of carbohydrates. So first, the classification of carbohydrates is based on four different properties. So first is the size of the base carbon chain, number of carbons in the molecule. So we have trioses, tatlo, tetroses, apat, pentol, lima, and hexoaryl. Next question. Yan.
So sa second properties is yung the location of
Yan.
ay,
Nawala.
ano. So carbonyl function group which is yung may two forms, yung aldose and ketos. So 'di ba ang carbohydrates from the word hydrates is yung parang yung any molecule or compounds na may may water doon na nako-contain para like yung water na makuha nila is parang gamitin nila yun para maging structure nila. So yun yung hydrates. So aldose form aldose form has a terminal carbonyl group which is called an aldehyde group. So pag makita niyo dyan sa picture sa baba, yung aldose is yung OCH na carbonyl group niya is nasa taas, diba? Yung pag-good, nakita niyo, yung OCH, yan yung aldose group. So, So, i-remember niyo lang yung terminal na word. So, aldose. Pag ketose form naman is, yung carbonyl group niya is nasa middle link to two other carbon atoms. So, yan yung nasa side na picture, yung CEO na representation God is nasa middle ng yun. Next picture.
Monosaccharide. Mono means one. It is a simple sugar that cannot be hydrolyzed to a simpler form. So this sugar can contain 3, 4, 5, and 6 or more carbon atoms known as trioses, tetroses, pentoses, and basta respectively yun. So, tapos the most common monosaccharide is the glucose, fructose, and the galactose. Next question.
Sige, wait. So, disaccharide. So, ito na yung properties na based on the number of sugar units. So, yun na yung monosaccharides, sabi ni Pat. Then, disaccharides are formed when two monosaccharide units are joined by a glycosidic linkage. So, so pag ang disaccharide, pag may hydrolysis na mangyari, is ma-split siya into monosaccharides by the disaccharide enzymes. So, ang most common disaccharides are yung maltose, lactose, and sucrose. So, yun lang sir. Next po, sir. Ako lang, sige. Oligosaccharides are the chaining of 2 to 10 sugar units. So, ang example ng oligosaccharides is yung raffinose tsaka yung stachyose. So, familiar naman tayo yun, di ba, sa raffinose tsaka stachyose. Meron yan siya nung biochem, biochem. Polysaccharides are formed by the linkage of many monosaccharides units. So, ang oligosaccharides is yung pag ma-break down siya, more than 10 units siya ng monosaccharides. So, hindi lang within 2 to 10, unlike oligosaccharides. So, most common polysaccharides are the starch and the glycogen. So, next po, sir.
So the
So, okay,
Ay,
go, Pat.
ikaw?
Ikaw, Pat.
Sige, go. The stereochemistry of the compound. So the central carbons of a carbohydrate are asymmetric or chiral. Four different groups are attached to the carbon atom. These allow for various spatial arrangements around each asymmetric carbon, also called stereogenic centers, forming molecules called stereoisomers.
So, may addition lang, sir. So, pag sinabing asymmetric carbon, yun yung siyang, sabi ni Pat na 4 different groups. Ma-attach siya sa 4 different groups. Hindi lang siya into 2 groups. Pag sinabing asymmetric is 4 different groups yung ma-attach niya. Chiral naman if yung 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 molecule is parang non-superimposable good siya. Yung, 'di ba? Ma-remember niyo yung image na parang same tawag ito. Parang molecule that is not superimposable on its mirror image. So, yun na lang ang chiral. So, next po, sir. So stereoisomers have the same order and types of bonds, but different spatial arrangement and different properties. So, if if the hydroxyl group or the oxygen bridge, yung OH god na makita natin mamaya sa picture, may picture man yan, bridge of the ring form projects to the right in the Fisher projection. So, i-emphasize na ako guys sa Fisher projection kay may dalawa kasi yan na projection na para i-model ang carbohydrates. Ang Fisher projection tsaka yung Howard projection. So, ang Fisher projection kay parang yung skeletal lang good, yung straight tapos murag ladder type. Ang Howard is yung parang piatos good na model, piatos. So, the sugar belongs to the D series and receives the prefix D. So, ang meaning ng D is yung dextrorotatory. Di ba, ma-remember niyo guys sa biochemistry, dextrorotatory, yung hydroxyl group is makita sa right na side. Next po, sir.
Ako din yan.
If it projects to... Sige, ikaw dapat.
If it projects to the left, then it belongs to the L series and receives the prefix L. So, ang L dyan is yan yung ang laboratory. So, sa may left side yan siya. So, a monosaccharide is assigned to the D or the I. Wait lang. D naman is dextrorotatory. So, monosaccharide is assigned to the D or the L series according to the configuration of the highest number asymmetric. These stereoisomers, called enantiomers, are images that cannot be overlapped and are non-superimposable. So, enantiomers is each pair of molecules that are mirror image to each other po. So, meaning kay parang good, di na ko siya na-explain. Basta nagaharap ay parang good sila. Like,
Mirror image.
like, wait lang, paano ba ma-explain? Ano ma-explain?
Yung, parang kuan pat yung parang single molecule good na yung mirror image niya is um parang same sila ng tawag nito.
Wait lang, magkampo. Yung, ay, di ba ma-remember niyo guys, yung sa good? Yung sa biochem good, na hindi sabi ni Ma'am Beth sa atin dati na yung sa mirror image, yung enantiomers is yung parang sa kamay good natin. Halimbawa, sir, nakikita-kita ka, sir.
Sige, pakita natin muna, Wong.
Okay na. Wait lang, kung wala ko yung So, maano siya, di ba? Ang kamot na to. Yung enantiomers is, sa tawag ka na, mirror image siya. So, if kani ang ato ang right, which is lever rotator, ay ang dextrorotatory, bali ano, ga, gaan, ga, ano siya, murag ka ng, hindi na ko konta. Yes, kabay ko yan, si Santo Mani.
Baligtad pat.
Ay, ano ba?
Pwede din ako makita. Ana siya sir. If non-superimposable siya, yung mirror image ng isang molecule is pag ipatong mo good, sir, hindi sila parang compatible good. So yan yung non-superimposable. So ibig sabihin chiral. So hindi siya mapatong. Dili sila same og parang basta dili sila same pag ipatong.
Okay. Next lesson. And so next is carbohydrate metabolism na. Sino sa carbohydrate metabolism? Halo.
Sino yung mag-report dito? Metabolism? Okay, sige, next tayo kung wala pa sila. Sino ang next? Ang next?
Ay, sir.
Steps
Yung
in
sa,
citric acid. Yeah.
yung sa daw, sir, yung sa metabolism, kay si, Aguirre at saka si Bugadar po.
Agire. Okay, wala pa si nakapasok si Bugador. I think may problem. Sige,
Gago,
Agire.
si Kelly daw sir, di daw siya marinig sir.
Si,
Si, Aguirre, siguro siya salita pero di siya marinig.
si Agire na lang. Agire, can you hear us?
Hello, 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 hello.
Ara na, Kel.
Na Agire. Ha?
Hello. Oh, yan
Sige.
na. Yay. Hello. Ayan na. So, what is carbohydrate metabolism? Marinig na.
Oo, oo.
Oo, marinig.
Hello? Ayan.
Marinig mo.
Marinig na marinig.
Metabolism. So, carbohydrates, di ba? Carbohydrates are starch, sugars, fibers na galing sa ginakain natin na food, which is from vegetables, fruits, or dairy products. So, carbohydrate metabolism, ito yun siya yung whole na yan siya na process na fundamental biochemical processes na nag-ensure na makabigay ng constant supply ng energy or ATPs sa body natin, ay hindi lang sa body natin, but to all living cells. Ang pinaka-importante na carbohydrate is ang glucose. Why? Because ang glucose, makita niyo mamaya, lagi siyang magamit na na chemical so that we can produce ATP, pyruvate, etc. etc. And another fact, ang glucose kay pinaka most important organ, isa sa pinaka most important organ natin which is ang brain, only food niya is glucose. So, yun. So, glucose can be broken down via glycolysis, tapos mag-enter siya sa Krebs, tapos mag-enter siya sa oxidative phosphorylation to generate ATP. So, yun, next. Next. Next po, sir. So, pinaka-first na process para ma-break ng glucose into ATP is ang glycolysis. So, after digestive process, ay nag-start pa lang digestive process, sa mouth, yun.
Sir?
Sa mouth siya nag-start,
Yes.
nag-breakdown
Yan.
yung sugar into monosaccharides with the help of salivary amylase. Tapos magbabain siya sa intestinal wall, tapos magpunta yan siya sa circulation natin para ma-circulate yung yung ATPs. So dito sa picture, yang makita nyo merong itong tawag dyan, hexokinase. Yan yung glucose ang glucose man kay ma-form yan siya na parang maging 6 good through the help of phosphorylation and by hexokinase to form glucose 6-phosphate. Tapos mag-consume yan siya ng dalawang energy kasi sa forming pa lang ng 6-carboxyl na glucose, mag-consume siya ng isa, tapos mag-consume yan siya ulit ng isa sa ADP, ang sa gilid dito sa left. maging ATP. Tapos, going down, mag-produce ang ang glucose 6-phosphate maging phosphate na kay phosphorylation man. Glucose 6-phosphate maging fructose 1,6-biphosphate. Tapos, ma-convert yan siya into fructose-6-phosphate. Na-discuss naman to dati sa biochem. So, kung di nyo ako masyado magets, review lang. Tapos, at this point, ito kasi yung phase na energy yielding. So, nagakuha siya ng energy. After that, hanggang maka-form siya sa energy consuming phase pala, maka-form siya ng yan, fructose-1,6-biphosphate. Tapos mapupunta siya sa coupling of phosphorylation, which is yung na-form, mag-split yan siya into two and will have the exergonic reaction. Tapos mag-produce ng dalawang NH, then makaproduce yan ng energy at saka free phosphate down to endergonic reaction. After that, yung third phase, it's the energy releasing phase. Sa energy releasing phase, kaya diba na-split. So, ang mangyari dyan, yung ADP niya, and yun na. In summary, isa ka glucose molecule breaks down into two pyruvate molecules and it creates dalawang net AT molecules. So, yung una-una, nag-break down yung glucose, tapos makaka-create yan siya ng dalawang ATP molecule at saka dalawang NADH molecule by glycolysis. So therefore, ang glycolysis, nag-generate lang yan siya ng energy for the cell and creates pyruvate molecules that can be processed further through the aerobic Krebs cycle. Aerobic, ibig sabihin may oxygen, also called the citric acid cycle or the TCA, CA, tapos tricarboxylic acid cycle, converted into lactic acid or alcohol, or by fermentation are used for the synthesis of glucose through sa gluconeogenesis. So, dyan sa screen, yan yung glycolysis can be expressed in this equation. So, yan. So, next po, sir. Dyan sa anaerobic. So, anaerobic respiration, it occurs in most cells of the body when oxygen is limited or mitochondria are absent or non-functional. So, ibig sabihin, to summarize it, parang wala siyang oxygen or non-functional tapos wala ding mitochondria. So, when oxygen is limited or absent, pyruvic pathway. So, magdiretso yan siya sa aerobic kapag yung pathway niya kapag one. These reactions, pyruvate can be converted into lactic acid in addition to generating additional ATP. This pathway serves to keep the pyruvate concentration low or glycolysis continues and it oxidizes NADH into NAD+ na kailangan sa glycolysis. Next. Next po. In the
Citric acid cycle, di ba si Boggs ganun? Hello?
Hala, sige. Si Bogs na dyan sa crab cycle.
Ay, okay. Sir, ano ko, idikit ko na lang yung phone ko sa mic, sir, kay nagtawag lang si Bog sa akin.
Bogs.
Okay.
Oo. Sige na, Bog, ikaw na. Marinig si Bog, sir, pag tapat ko.
Sige daw.
Sige, daw, story daw, Bog.
Sige, go.
Marinig? Marinig ka, Bog, marinig. Next daw po, sir. Sa steps na. Wala. Next po, sir. Ayan na. Magkain na. Bakit? Klase ka? Ay, sir, pabalik mo na, sir, kaya di pa natapos explain si Bob.
Ay, hindi pa pala.
Sir, marinig daw po si Bob, sir. Hello, marinig po daw si Bob.
Laman pero hinay.
Marinig daw, Bob, pero hinay daw.
Naka-loudspeak na na mo cellphone.
Opo, naka-loudspeak na ang phone ko, sir.
Mm. Sige lang, okay lang, makapalo mo sila.
Oo, sige, go, Bogs.
Ayun na.
Step 6 na.
Okay.
Next po, sir.
Pwede mo ay ganito na lang itong video good kasi I think bigay mo na lang yung link sa
Video na
kanila
ba?
ha.
Opo.
I-next
Sir?
ko na lang. Ibigay mo na lang yung link ng video na to kasi parang hindi yata nila makita. Kasi
Okay, sige.
bigay mo na lang later. Next na tayo. Electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation. Hello? Hello? Sino ang
Sir, parang
report?
kailan daw ata mag-report dyan kaso unable ang ano nila, na walang net nila, sir.
Sino si?
Si Agirit po.
Ire. O sige, next na lang tayo. Next na reporter. I-forward ko na lang, baka makapasok siya. Laboratory methods of determination, yun. Baka makapasok siya later, balik ka na lang.
Sir, marinig na po ako.
Oo, marinig.
So, proceed na tayo sa laboratory methods of determination. So, ito yun siya yung mga test na na ginagamit or yung mga principles na ginagamit once na mag-test na tayo ng glucose sa laboratory. So, these are measurement of glucose is critical to the diagnosis of and management of disease affecting carbohydrate metabolism. So, next. So, these are the specimen considerations, collection, and storage. So bago tayo pumunta talaga dun sa mga test na ginagawa, ito muna yung mga specimen na na ginagamit once na mag-test tayo for glucose. So, whole blood, so it can be random blood or fasting blood. So, plasma, then serum. Ang serum is yung standard talaga na ginagamit. Then, meron tayong CSF or cerebrospinal fluid, then pleural fluid, urine, interstitial fluid. So, ito yun siya yung interstitial fluid. Yung makita niyo sa picture, para kasi yan siyang yung continuous check for person with diabetes using a device. So, yung device yan na yan siya, nakadikit yan siya sa skin. Tapos yan makita parang meron siyang needle. Tapos, yan yung interstitial fluid. Tapos meron yan siyang nakakonect dyan sa sa device na yan is merong yung yung nag-produce din ng insulin na kapag kasi gina niya gina-monitor niya pag ano ba pag nagataas or nagababa yung ating glucose. So once na magtaas siya or magbaba siya, mag-react agad doon yung yung nag-produce ng insulin para i-manage na yung glucose natin. So wait lang. So, ang serum natin dapat ma-separate siya from the cells within 30 minutes. Pero, again, na-discuss naman siya paulit-ulit na pag hindi possible yung pag-separate ng serum from the other cells kay dapat gamitan na natin ng preservative na sodium fluoride. So, it is added to the specimen to inhibit glycolysis if testing is not possible within 30 minutes kasi naman siya ma-process na yung ating glucose once na hindi natin siya ma-preserve. So, sodium fluoride is a glucose preservative and not suitable, hindi siya suitable for enzymatic procedures kasi meron tayong chemical procedures and enzymatic procedures. So, hindi siya magamit sa enzymatic procedures. Then, it is a enzymatic inhibitor. So, sa ating fasting whole blood, lower ang glucose concentration than plasma glucose. So sa Tietz na book, ang sabi is 10% to 12% ang na lower than plasma, pero sa Henry's ang sabi is 10% to 15%. So andyan lang siya talaga na range siya sa 10% to 15%. Then ang capillary blood is hindi siya dapat gamitin to diagnose diabetes or hypoglycemia kasi siya meron siyang mga ayan may iba siyang effect sa ating glucose. So next sa glucose measurement, next na po. So, the random blood sugar this is for emergency cases kasi random siya. Kaya, di ba meron tayong fasting blood. So, once emergency, hindi naman maka-fasting yung patient kasi di ba kailangan ng 8 to 10 hours na fasting. So, emergency man siya. So, random blood sugar na lang ang gamitin. So, it is requested during insulin shock and for patients with diabetic coma, yan siya, diabetic coma. Next na po. So, ito na siya yung fasting blood sugar. So, it measures the overall glucose homeostasis. So, achieve after 8 to 12. So, ang nakalagay dito, 8 to 12 hours of fasting. Next na po, sir. So, number 3 is the 2-hour post-prandial. Wait lang, sir. Number 3 pa po. So, 2-hour postprandial blood sugar or 2 ppbs. So, 2 hours after eating. So, it measures how well the body metabolizes glucose. So, inaano niya kung yung level of metabolizing glucose ng body natin. So, yun yung gina-measure niya. So, next is number 4. So, the glucose tolerance test or the GTT. So, it is multiple blood sugar test, then it is performed to diagnose gestational diabetes. So, it is used to determine how well the body metabolizes glucose over a required period of time. So, same siya sa 2-hour postprandial. So, it should be performed to diagnose gestational diabetes and it is not generally recommended for routine clinical use in the diagnosis of diabetes. So, hindi siya kasi maraming kailangang preparation pag sa GTT kasi after eating pa siya, so hindi siya magamit for random na testing. So next. So there are types of GTT, the oral glucose tolerance test, the or OGTT. So, meron siyang dalawang kinds, the Johnny Isaacsson method. So, it is the single dose method. So, ito din yung most common na ginagamit and the Exton Rose method or divided oral dose or double dose method. So, ito yung mga requirements for OGTT kaya dapat hindi nagagamit yung GTT na mga na testing pag sa sa routine na testing kasi ito yung mga requirements. So, patient should be ambulatory or dapat outpatient siya kasi marami siyang preparation. Then, unrestricted diet of 150 grams carbohydrate per day for 3 days. So, from 3 days pa talaga yung niya, preparation. Then, unlimited physical activity, should not smoke, kasi pag nag-smoke yung patient, mag-false increase yung kanyang glucose. Then, if the patient will drink alcohol, mag-false decrease na naman siya. Then, fasting for 10 hours. Then, glucose load. So, di ba meron tayo yung sa lab na yung juice na nagipakita ni Ma'am Lapia dati, yung orange yung nasa ref. So, yun yung mga ginapa-inom sa patient. So, meron siyang mga specific na grams. So, 75 grams, yan yung standard for adults. Then, 100 grams for pregnant. Then, 1.75 grams of glucose per kilogram body weight sa mga pediatric patients. So, sa procedure ng OGTT, wait. So, sa procedure ng OGTT, so dapat i-instruct ang patient to drink the glucose load so within 5 minutes. Then, collect blood sample after 1 hour. So, meron tayong tatlong sample. So, after 1 hour siya na nag-take ng glucose load, kunan siya ng sample. Then, ika 2 hours, tapos ika 3 hours na naman. Then, collect the fasting blood sample. So, urine may also be collected. The patient should avoid exercise, eating, drinking, or except water. So, water okay lang. And smoking during the test. For non-pregnant women and adults, only the fasting and the 2-hour sample may be measured or according to physician's request. So, mag-refer pa din tayo sa request ng doctor. So, again, it is not recommended for routine clinical use kasi marami siya masyadong preparation. Next na po. So, for the intravenous tolerance test. So, used for diabetes mellitus patients with gastrointestinal disorder. So, fasting blood sugar is required. Then, glucose load 0.5 grams of glucose per kilogram body weight given within 3 minutes. So, administered intravenously. So, sa IV siya ginapadaan. Then, second blood collection is done after 5 minutes of IV glucose. So, di ba, through IV siya, tapos pag na-introduce na siya through IV after 5 minutes, so, kuna na siya ng second blood na specimen. So, indications, patients who are able to tolerate a large carbohydrate load, then those with, wait lang, di ko So, those with altered gastric physiology, those who had previous operation or surgery in the intestine, and those with chronic malabsorption syndrome. So, dyan gina-perform yung IVGTP. So, next. So, meron sa laboratory methods of determination. Meron tayong chemical methods and enzymatic methods. So, unahin natin yung sa chemical methods. So, next na po. So, first is oxidation reduction method. So, familiar naman kayo dito kasi na yung sa assignment natin nung Tuesday. So, So first is the alkaline copper reduction method. So the principle under this is the reduction of cupric ions to cuprous ions forming cuprous oxide in hot alkaline solution. So yung cupric ions magiging cuprous ion siya. So because of heat. So next. So under sa alkaline copper reduction method, meron tayong Colin Wu method, may Nelson Sumogi method, and Leo Cuproin method. Then the Benedict's method. So first is the Colin Wu method. So cuprous iron will become phosphomolybdenum blue. So sa process niya, ang end product niya is yung phosphomolybdenum blue. So, ito yun siya from cuprous ions plus phosphomolybdate. So, magiging phosphomolybdic acid or phosphomolybdenum blue. So, yung end product niya is color blue. The next is Nelson Sumogi method, the most common used in chemical method for glucose. So, ito yun siya yung pinatalaga ka-common. So, cuprous iron plus arsenomolybdate is equals to arsenomolybdic acid or arsenomolybdenum blue. So, yan yung end product niya, ang arsenomolybdenum blue. Next is the neocuproin method. From cuprous iron, tapos plus neocuproin. So, ang end product niya is cuprous neocuproin complex. So, ang color niya is yellow or yellow-orange. Then, lastly is the Benedict's method or the modification of polymer. So it is used for detection and quantitation of reducing substances in body fluids like blood and urine. So stabilizing agent niya is yung citrate or titrate. Next. So, 'di ba ang una is yung yung alkaline copper reduction method under sa oxidation reduction method. Ang second is the alkaline ferric reduction method or called as Hagedorn-Jensen. So it involves the reduction of yellow ferric cyanide to a colorless ferrocyanide by glucose. So it is inverse colorimetry. Then sabihin na, 'di ba, ang first again is oxidation reduction, then the second is the condensation method, the orthotoluidine or the Boski method. So nandun din ito siya sa ating assignment. So glucose plus aromatic amines, then ang kanyang reagent na ginagamit is glacial HAC or glacial acetic acid, tapos maging heat glycosilamine plus Schiff's base. So yung kanyang end product is Schiff's base. Then for next, enzymatic method. So dito na tayo sa enzymatic method. So it acts on glucose but not on other sugars and not on other reducing substances. So sa glucose lang talaga siya specifically. Next na. So first is the glucose oxidase method. So measures BD glucose. Then it measures CSF and urine glucose. So una sa glucose oxidase method is the colorimetric glucose oxidase method or Cypher-Bernstein-Field method. So yun yung niya, parang process niya. Glucose plus O2 tapos ginagamitan siya ng reagent na glucose oxidase. So pag na-mix na yun siya, magiging gluconic acid na siya or H2O2. Tapos from H2O2, mag-add na naman ang chromogenic substances. Tapos gamitan siya ng reagent na peroxidase. Then oxidized chromogenic substance plus H2O. So, ano yung kanyang end product. Then, next po, sir. Number 2. So, next is the polarographic glucose oxidase. So, it measures the rate of oxygen consumption, which is proportional to glucose concentration. So glucose oxidase in the reagent catalyzes the oxidation of glucose by oxygen under first order conditions forming hydrogen peroxide. So wala na sali yung ano ata niya, yung picture, yung arrow lang ang nadala. So ano yan siya, from glucose plus O2, gamitan siya ng glucose oxidase na reagent to gluconic acid to H2O2. Tapos H2O2 to C2H5OH. So, ang reagent na naman is catalase. So, magiging CH3CHO plus CH2O. So, i-send man siguro namin yung ano to? PPT. So, i-ano ko lang ulit yung ano niya talaga process. So, first is the glucose oxidase, then second will be hexokinase method. So it is the most specific glucose method. So it is the reference method. So plasma collected using heparin, EDTA, fluoride oxalate, or citrate may be used for the test. So this is the most sensitive and specific method. Increased specificity due to glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase, and NADH is the end product measured. So NADH yung end product niya pero gina-measure pa rin siya kasi yung ano yung kung yung level ng NADH or yung amount ng NADH then not affected by ano. Next. So yan yung ano niya. Yung ginagamit na ano sa kanya na ano yan, na reagent is hexokinase yang sa una, tapos ang sa pangalawa is the glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase or G6PD. Next na person. So the glucose dehydrogenase method is, so in this method, glucose is reduced to produce a chromophore that is measured spectrophotometrically or an electric current. So ginagamitan siya ng spectrophotometer. So the amount of NADPH generated is proportional to the glucose concentration. So it provides results in close agreement with hexokinase procedures. So mutarotaze is also added to shorten the time necessary to reach equilibrium. Next. So, Rosel, it's your turn.
Finally, so another enzymatic method is the dextrose-sticks or cellular strip method. So the dextrose-stick method is a method of estimating glucose levels. It is a rapid procedure that employs a paper strip impregnated with an enzyme chromagen system, which, when exposed sa ascending concentrations of glucose, is naga-change from a gray color to various shades of blue. So the advantage of this procedure is that it is inexpensive and it requires only 1 minute. So it is important in establishing correct insulin amount for next dose, and it is effective in reducing the rate of development of diabetic complications. An individual with a capillary glucose of greater than or equal to 140 mg per dl should be rescreened with a fasting plasma glucose, HbA1c, or OGTT using venous samples. Next po, sir. Next is the glycosylated hemoglobin or HbA1c, or hemoglobin to which glucose is bound. Glucose molecules in the blood normally become stuck to hemoglobin molecules. This means that the hemoglobin has become glycosylated. So as nagataas ang blood sugar ng isang tao, the more din ng hemoglobin is nagiging glycosylated. So it is also known as glycated hemoglobin, and it is the largest subfraction of normal hemoglobin A in both diabetic and non-diabetic individuals. For diagnostic significance, it is a reliable method in monitoring of long-term glucose control, and since the hemoglobin attaches to RBC, For the life of RBC, which is normally 120 days, it reflects the average blood glucose level over the previous 2 to 4 months. So HbA1c levels should be performed every 3 to 6 months in individuals with diabetes to monitor glycemic control using a certified method traceable to the diabetes control and complications trials reference method. So 3 to 6 months. So HbA1c is determined 3 to 6 months para malaman kung gaano nakokontrol yung diabetes ng isang tao. So measurement, dietary status on the day of the test has no effect on HbA1c. And it is also recommended that HbA1c be measured twice a year for patients who are meeting treatment goals and quarterly for non-compliant patients. And the specimen needed is the add the whole blood, and the methods are electrophoresis, immunoassay, HPLC, and affinity chromatography. Next po, sir. Yan. So those are the methods for HbA1c. For interpretation of results, 5.7 to 6.4% indicates increased risk for diabetes or prediabetes, while greater than 6.5% is indicative of diabetes mellitus and can be used to diagnose diabetes using a method that is National Glycohemoglobin Standardization Program certified and standardized with the DCCT assay. For every 1% change in the HbA1c value,
Hello? Reporter, sino mo? Patricia Nicole?
Guys.
Nawala
Sir,
ata
tawag
siya.
ako.
Okay, si Lloyd na pala. Lloyd,
Hindi
ikaw
pa,
na ba,
sir.
Lloyd?
So, ako na
Okay.
lang mag-ano sa fructosamine. Nawala si Rosa.
Sige.
So, ang fructosamine is also known as glycosylated or glycated albumin or plasma proteins or ketoaninine. It is a reflection of short-term glucose control, so 3 to 6 weeks. So, may be useful for monitoring diabetic individuals with chronic hemolytic anemia and hemoglobin variation, so HBS or HBC. So, decreased RBC lifespan. Then, it should not be measured in case of low plasma albumin. Then, pag may low plasma albumin, so low din yung fructosamine. So, methods niya na ginagamit is affinity chromatography, HPLC, and photometric. Then, reference value is 205 to 285 micromole per liter. So, interference is high uric acid, triglyceride, and bilirubin levels and presence of heparin or hemolysis. So, next na po, sir.
Yes, check also your section kasi gina-check ko yung attendance ninyo if nakikinig ba kayo o hindi kasi may questions ako diyan. So you can participate naman, ha? Okay, kasi binibilang ko yung sumasagot nasa 10 lang. So yung iba nasaan pala sila, no? Okay, anyway. Sige.
So, next is, malapit na talaga siya matapos. So, the interstitial glucose measuring device. So, na-discuss ko na yan siya kanina, yung device na anong pala yan siya sa may waist siya nakakabit. Then, the result will provide information about glucose patterns over hours and days. So, continuous talaga yung pag-measure niya kasi all day, nandyan lang talaga yan siya sa may waist. Tapos, basta, yan, interstitial glucose measuring. Para yan siya sa mga hindi stable yung kanilang glucose. Next na po, sir. Ay, dun pa, sir. Balik. So, other test na sa glucose is the CSF glucose. So, increase ang CSF glucose sa diabetes mellitus, then decrease siya sa bacterial meningitis, TB or tuberculosis fungal and amoebic meningitis, subarachnoid hemorrhage, and systemic hypoglycemia. So, sorry, wala ko siya na appeal. So, ang reference value ng CSF is sa child is 60 to 80 milligrams per DL, then sa adult is 40 to 70 milligrams per DL. So, again, ang reference value is pag sa child is 60 to 80 milligrams per DL, then sa adult is 40 to 70 milligrams per DL. Then, ang normal CSF to glucose ratio is less than 0.5. Then, sa C-peptide test is it is formed during the conversion of pro-insulin to insulin. So, method of testing use is immunometric assay. Increase siya sa insulinoma type 2 diabetes mellitus, ingestion of hypoglycemic drugs, decrease naman siya sa type 1 diabetes mellitus. So, increase siya sa type 2 DM, then decrease siya sa type 1 DM. So, reference value niya, so wala po siya na appeal there, then ang reference value is 0.90 to 4.3 ng per ml. Tapos, ang normal ratio niya of C-peptide to insulin is 5:1 or 15:1. So, next na po, sir. Sa ketone test na jud ni siya. So, ketone test recommended when plasma glucose reach 300 mg per DL. So, kasi 'di ba pag na talaga pag excessive na talaga yung glucose natin, so present na yung ketones. So, tapos ito yung methods na ginagamit. So, Gerard's perchloride test, nitroprusside test, acetest tablets, and ketosticks, and ketosite assay. So, na-discuss na natin yan sa ating AUBF kung ano yung mga ginagamit na test for keto. So, yun na siya. Thank you.
So next, guys, we have the clinical significance. So under the clinical significance, we have diabetes mellitus and hypoglycemia, and these two are clinical conditions associated with the abnormal carbohydrate metabolism. Hello, marinig ako, sir? Hello? Marinig ako?
Yes, Lloyd. Yes, Lloyd.
Ay, okay. So, first, we have the diabetes mellitus. Diabetes mellitus is a group of metabolic disorders of carbohydrate metabolism in which glucose is underutilized or it is not used, and producing hyperglycemia. It was initially diagnosed by the oral glucose tolerance test, or OGTT, which was mentioned by Charis earlier. And in 1970, sir, wala pa ako natapos. And during 1979, parang there is the National Diabetes Data Group, they parang proposed a criterion for diabetes mellitus for its diagnosis. We have these two major criteria, which is the diabetes mellitus. Type 1 yan siya, hindi siya type 11. Type 1 and type 2. So next po, sir. Yun ako ulit ko ba? Ulit ko. Ayan na. So we have at the first one we have the type 1 diabetes mellitus. It is formerly known as the IDDM or juvenile onset diabetes. Approximately 5 to 10% of all individuals with diabetes mellitus are in this category. So the symptoms for type 1 diabetes mellitus, we have polyuria, polydipsia, and rapid weight loss. Polyuria is when your body makes too much urine, and polydipsia is para siyang a phenomenon where you have an excessive thirst. And polyuria, polydipsia, and rapid weight loss are present acutely, and which means that they have sudden onset. Next po. Ay, wait lang. Individuals have also insulinopenia, which is a deficiency of insulin, and the peak of incidence. Sir, pabalik ako sa... Late man ko eh. Ay. Hello sir, wait lang sir. Wait lang sir. Pabalik ako sa ano sir. Doon po sa type 2. So we have the type 2 diabetes mellitus, which is formerly known as NIDDM or non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. It constitutes approximately 90% of all case of diabetes. So patients of type 2 diabetes mellitus have minimal symptoms and they are not prone to ketosis and are non-dependent on insulin to prevent ketonuria. Ketosis is a metabolic state in which yung body mo will utilize fat as a source of energy or fuel. Next po, sir. So we have the gestational diabetes mellitus. It is a carbohydrate intolerance of variable yan siya, severity with onset or first recognition during pregnancy. So in gestational diabetes mellitus, we have to note that women with diabetes who became pregnant are not included in this category. And ang included lang is yung women who have abnormal glucose tolerance during their pregnancy range. Patients with gestational diabetes mellitus during their at 6 to 12 weeks postpartum, all who had GDM should be evaluated for diabetes, and if diabetes is not present, be re-evaluated at least every 3 years. Next po, sir. So we have the impaired glucose tolerance. Impaired glucose tolerance is another type of specifications under the diabetes mellitus. Um, Impaired glucose tolerance is diagnosed in people who have fasting blood glucose concentrations less than those required for a diagnosis of diabetes mellitus, but have plasma glucose response during the OGTT between normal and diabetic states. So the distinct characteristic of patients, they have increased prevalence of atherosclerosis or yung may build up ng fat sa arteries and mortality from cardiovascular disease. So, next, sir. We have the impaired fasting glucose or the IFG. It is analogous to IGT, which means that it is comparable in certain aspects, but it is diagnosed uh, by a fasting glucose value above normal but below the concentration for diagnosis of diabetes. One distinct characteristic of patients is um, they have uh, no yan siya. They have no increased prevalence of atherosclerosis and mortality from cardiovascular disease. Impaired fasting glucose has something to do with the glucose hemostasis and other stuff. Pero hindi siya nag-develop ng atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease. Both IGT and IFG are not clinical entities, but they are rather risk factors for diabetes and other cardiovascular diseases. Next po, Sir Cesar says na.
Hello, hello, hello. Madunggan ka ninyo, guys.
Oo, sis,
Yes,
madunggan.
yes.
Yes. Yes po.
Okay, good morning, everybody.
Yes, marinig.
So, ang so let's proceed to pathogenesis of type 1 DM or diabetes
Yes,
mellitus.
marinig.
So, most results from a cellular mediated autoimmune destructions of the insulin secreting cells of pancreatic B cells. It was also mediated by T cells, yung destruction ng ating diabetes mellitus type 1, and it begins months or years before the clinical presentation. The rate of islet cell destruction is usually more rapid in children than in adults. So sa ating genetics, um, type 1 diabetes mellitus is susceptible and it is inherited, but the mode of inheritance is complex atayan siya and has not been completely defined. So next po, sir. So, eh, wait lang. Next po, sir, sa page 68, slide 68. Ayan. So, pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes mellitus. So, sa type 2 diabetes mellitus, the insulin resistance is decreased ability of insulin to act on the peripheral tissue and is thought to be the primary underlying pathological process. So, insulin resistance is found in both obese, non-diabetic individuals and in patients with type 2 diabetes. Another one is the B cell dysfunction. It is an inability of the pancreas to produce sufficient insulin to compensate for the insulin resistance. Next po, sir. So ating genetics, type 2 diabetes is 10 times more likely to occur in an obese individual with a parent who has diabetic family history. So, malaki talaga yung chance na yung offspring ng ating parent is makakuha ng type 2 diabetes mellitus kapag obese ang individual or ang parent. So, environmental factors such as diet and exercise are important determinants in pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes. Next po, sir. So, in the diagnosis of diabetes mellitus, the diagnosis of diabetes mellitus depends solely on the demonstration of hyperglycemia. So, in type 1 diabetes mellitus, it is easy. Hyperglycemia appears abruptly or madaling ma-observe natin yung hyperglycemia sa type 1 diabetes mellitus. And on the other hand, in type 2 diabetes mellitus, it is difficult because metabolic changes are often not severe and it is enough for the patients to notice symptoms. And it's and in severe, accompanied by serious metabolic derangements. Next po, sir. So in diabetes mellitus, any of the following is diagnostic. First is the classic symptoms of diabetes and casual plasma glucose concentration of greater than or equal to 200 milligrams per dl or 11.1 millimole per liter. Next is the fasting plasma glucose is greater than or equal to 126 milligram per dl or 7 millimole per liter. The next is the 2-hour post-load plasma glucose concentration, which is greater than or equal to 200 milligram per dl during the OGTT or 11.1 millimole per liter. Next po, sir. Sunod na po. 11.1 millimole per liter. Next po, sir. Sunod na po. Lloyd.
Sila Matthew yan.
Kay Matthew din, Matthew.
Sila sila Matthew.
Sorry. Ayun, thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, Cess, for that very information pack segment ng DM or diabetes mellitus. So, as you've all known, or as we've all heard, there are reference values and there are reference intervals. So there's a difference. Here, what we will show you on the screen are reference intervals from our reference book, which is paano ba to? TETS. Basta yun, TETS or TETS. Nakinig Kem. And then these are the charts or the table. So first we have sample fasting glucose. The first value is in milligrams per deciliter. Then we have momol per liter or millimole per liter. So these are for the plasma serum values. In adults 74 to 99, in children 60 to 100, premature neonates or babies 20 to 60, term neonates 30 to 60, whole blood 65 to 95, CSF 40 to 70. So we have to note here that what as to what Lloyd said, the ADA or the American Diabetes Association has a criterion for diagnosing diabetes mellitus, which is of course 126 milligrams per deciliter. So ano ba talaga tong reference interval that we see here, such as 74 to 99? So when we refer to reference interval, we refer to a medical decision limit, or it is a data that has been gathered by laboratories from different population, and then they synthesize this data, and then these are the interval that they have seen within those population groups. So it doesn't mean that if you're lower than 74, it means that you're hypoglycemic. No, because the limit for hypoglycemia is way lower than the threshold of this reference interval. It doesn't also mean that if your plasma serum is higher than 99, you're already diabetic. No, because as we have known, the threshold or the limit for diabetes mellitus is 126 milligrams per deciliter as per the criteria of ADA. So ang reference interval na to just shows to us the normal ranges distributed among the population. Okay. So another term here is that another notable information about this chart or this reference interval is that there is no indicative proof or solid proof that when we age, our insulin tolerance also becomes greater. But it is shown that when we go into our middle age, if you are obese, then you are a risk factor for diabetes because you are insulin resistant. Okay, so pag tumatanda tayo, doesn't mean na we are insulin resistant. But rather, if you're overweight or obese, doon tayo nagkakaroon ng risk factor. Okay, so yun lang yun. Then next, we have our urine or our 24-hour urine. We have 1 to 15 milligrams per deciliter. Let's remember that our urine test for glucose is rapid, inexpensive, and non-invasive, and it's used to screen a large number of samples. But hindi to siya confirmatory, but rather we are just testing our urine para mas may further testing tayo if we really have problems or complications in our glucose metabolism. Okay, so it can also be used as screening for neonates and infants for inborn errors of metabolism. So pag sa baby yan siya, and then we have the specific value na tumaas ang sugar nun, then it might say or it might show us that they might have inborn errors of metabolism for reducing glucose. Okay, so next, we have here lactate. Again, it's from the reference of TITS or TETS ba yan? And then, for venous blood, we have para sa mga atres or if you're not in the hospital, 0.5 to 1.3 mmol per liter or 5 to 12 milligrams per deciliter. If you're in the hospital, we have 0.9 to 1.7 mmol and 8 to 15 mg per dl. Whereas we've read here in our book, in the hospital setting, mas mataas pa rin ang lactic acidosis. So, tumataas pa rin to. So it can exceed 5 mmol per liter or 45 milligrams per deciliter. So we all know that lactate or the determination of lactate is also important in the clinical setting because it shows us yung um, the utilization of pyruvate because it is a critical metabolite in our cell which originates from glycolysis. So lactate is oxidized by pyruvate as to what I've said kanina sa aming report by lactate dehydrogenase in the presence of NAD. So usually in the hospital, we have CSF values that are usually similar to blood concentrations but may change to CNS disorders. So age-related reference intervals for CFS lactate have been established in children. And again, it's an interval. So pag arterial blood na at rest, we have 0.36 to 0.75 or 3 to 7 milligrams per deciliter. And in the hospital, we have 0.36 to 1.25 and 3 to 11 milligrams per deciliter. Next, we have our table for diabetes mellitus or mga glucose, which will be reported by Irvin. Hello, Irvin. Good morning.
Hello, Matt. Good morning, guys.
Yes, loud and clear, Irvin. Take it away.
So on the next slide, we'll have the reference values of carbohydrates. So these reference values are can be found in the book of Bishop, so page 302 to 303. So in the first reference value is the categories of fasting plasma glucose. So in the normal fasting glucose, we have 70 to 90 milligrams per deciliter or 3.9 to 5.5 millimole per liter. Then, if you have a reference value of more than, not actually more than, around 100 to 125 milligrams per deciliter, or that is 5.6 to 6.16 in millimoles per liter, you are classified to have an impaired fasting glucose. Then, lastly, you have the provisional diabetes diagnostics, or you are parang pwede ka magkaroon ng diabetes. So if you have the values of more than or equal to 126 milligrams per deciliter, or that is in 7.0 millimeters per millimoles per liter. The next category is the categories for oral glucose. tolerance. So in our 2R PG or plasma glucose level, if you have less than or equal to 140 milligrams per deciliter, you have a normal glucose tolerance. Itong 140 milligrams per deciliter, this is 7.8 millimoles per liter. Then in if you have 140 to 199 range of values for your 2R plasma glucose levels, you are considered to have impaired glucose tolerance and you have provisional diabetes diagnosis if you have equal or more than 200 milligrams per deciliter. Th- That is 11.1 millimole per liter. And lastly, this is the last table is the diagnostic criteria for gestational diabetes. So, iba yung screening method ng gestational diabetes. So, iba rin yung kanyang criteria. For fasting plasma glucose, you should have greater than or equal to 92 milligrams per deciliter or greater than equal to 5.1 millimoles per liter. Next is the 1R plasma glucose. You should have, to be diagnosed with gestational diabetes, you should have greater than or equal to 180 milligrams per deciliter, or that is 10 millimoles per liter. And lastly, the 2R plasma glucose. You should have more than one you should have more than or equal to 153 milligrams per deciliter or greater than or equal to 8.5 millimoles per liter. Next slide, sir. So another table of for diagnosis of prediabetes and diabetes mellitus. So this is actually from the American Diabetes Association. This criteria, pero actually this was presented and revised by the expert committee on the diagnosis and classification of diabetes mellitus. It was only later on modified by ADA or yung American Diabetes Association. So likewise from the tables of sa kay Bishop, we have very similar values if you look into it. So according to ADA, the criteria of ADA, you are normal if you have less than 100, you have a values less than of 100 mg/dl or 5.6 millimoles per liter in your fasting plasma glucose. And if you have values less than 140 mg per dl and or less than 7.8 millimoles per liter in your 2R plasma glucose levels. So this is after your 75 grams glucose load. Next is they also have criteria for people who are most likely to have diabetes or pre-diabetic. Actually, ang basis lang nila is not in your blood test but in your hemoglobin A1C, parang antibody testing to. So if you have values of more than 5.7 to 6.4 or greater percent of hemoglobin A1C in your body, you are already pre-diabetic. The next is you have impaired fasting glucose if you have values of 100 to 125 milligrams per deciliter. Next is you have 5.6 to 6.9 millimoles per liter values in your fasting plasma glucose, you are considered to be impaired fasting glucose. And to have impaired glucose tolerance, you should if you have values of 140 to 199 milligrams per deciliter in your 2R plasma glucose level, you have an impaired glucose tolerance, or it is 7.8 to 11 millimoles per liter. Lastly, you are considered to have diabetes mellitus if you have greater than or equal to 126 milligrams per deciliter, that is 7.0 millimoles in millimoles per liter, and if you have greater than or equal to 200 milligrams per deciliter in your 2-hour plasma glucose level, and if you are having greater than or equal to 6.5% of hemoglobin A1C in your body. So just like what Matthew said before, these are just reference values. So if you have actually if your values for your fasting plasma glucose is around 127 milligrams per deciliter, it is not exactly sufficient to diagnose you with diabetes mellitus. The ADA actually presented in here criteria the criteria for diagnosis. Although these are reference values, they also said that if you have symptoms of hyperglycemia, which are polyuria, polydipsia, polyphagia, and yung unexplained weight loss with a casual plasma glucose of around 200 milligrams per deciliter, then you, and additionally with a 6.5% or higher level of hemoglobin AC in the body for 2 different days, then you are then this data is sufficient to diagnose you with diabetes mellitus. So these are just reference values. They also have another. So that is all.
Yun. Okay, so na ba kayo, Ervin? Or meron pa? Meron pang additional? Reporters?
Wala na ata, sir.
Okay, so I think wala na, no? Okay, class. So, thank you so much. Congratulations, reporters. At least you've done your best na bigay nyo lahat ng mga kailangan nating malaman. But I will be also sharing to you some of presentations. But class, after this, di ba, na ba mo yung klase? Wala.
Break po namin, sir.
Okay, break ninyo, no? And then, ang next class ninyo is 12. Class, I have a proposal if it's okay with you. Okay lang ba sa inyong class na mag-continue tayo din this afternoon? Hindi na lang mag-klase. So, it's up to you, no? If it's okay. Kung dili, okay lang po. Kaya para at least pero kung kung amoy mga lakaw and everything, so later this afternoon na lang ta ang klase. Okay? So sige daw class, magkuhan sa ta, mag-vote sa ta no if you want to continue our discussion kasi class I have an important inputs no, it's a review sa mga inyuhang gi-discuss na about carbohydrates. Then some possible recall questions from the board exam. So yun siya. Okay, so I think kung magkasi ta karon kung ipatayo nato ni siya, mahuman jud nato siya until 12 this morning. Okay, so I want you to vote class no if kung mag-continue class or kung gusto niyo magpadayon, I will be giving you at least 10 minutes break. Then #1 kung gusto niyo pero kung dili po #2. So I want to vote no, I want you to vote kung kinsa ang pinakadaghan nga mag-comment nga 1 mag-continue ta, kung kinsa pinakadaghan nga mag-comment og 2 dili ta mag-continue kay unya hapon na lang. Okay? So kasi class murag advantage of our discussion para fresh siya and then this afternoon wala na may buhaton. Okay? Wow, grabe yun si Lloyd on ayun siya vote. Oh, who's in favor of 1? Yan. Okay. So, kung halimbawa gipanggutom mo, pwede mo mangayo og food raa, pwede mo magdala og food no sa inyong front, sa inyong sa inyong table. So wala koy pakialam kung unsa gyud ang inyong basta ang importante mahuman nato ang carbohydrates kay mo ni siya ang mugawa sa ato ang mga board exam 5 to 10 questions ang mugawas sa ato ang carbohydrates sa board exam. So pinaka-importante yun nga lesson ang atong carbohydrates. So I think no, most of you voted for 1. Okay? So wala gyud nag-2 dara sa inyo ha. Okay. Sige. So I will be giving you class no at least mga 5 minutes to 10 minutes. Pero 5 minutes na lang class to get your lunch, okay? Ay, lunch, breakfast kung wala pa mo naka-breakfast, coffee or unsa pa ba so that we can start already our discussion about carbohydrates. Okay, so thank you so much for voting ha. Thank you so much for voting. At least marami pa. Ang yung iba hindi pa nag-vote. Ang naka-vote pa lang dito is nasa I think nasa 15 pa lang sila. Yung iba ano ang inyong vote. Okay? So sige. Please I want your cooperation class. I want your cooperation. Okay, sige. Any questions sa kanilang discussion? Wala bang mga questions dito sa discussion ng classmates ninyo? Yan. Bakit wala ang iba? Hindi sila nag-participate. Si Rodney, na ba si Rodney? Wala na ako nakita, no? Wala ba si Kuya Rodney ninyo? Okay, wala. Yan. Saan kaya yung iba, no? Sayang kung hindi sila maka-attend ngayon, yung iba, sayang. Okay, so anyway, dili na to sila ma-pressure. Yan. And okay, thank you so much for your response. Good morning, everyone. So, in this topic class, I will be discussing to you carbohydrates. Did you know class that carbohydrates topic no, or glucose topic class is one of a major topics na dapat nating pagtutuunan ng pansin dahil ito ay lumalabas talaga sa ating board exam. Okay, please don't forget that I think nasa mga 5 to 10 questions class or 5 questions class ang lumalabas dito sa ating board exam. I will try my best that everything na ating madidiscuss talaga or I will be trying my best class na lahat ng aking i-discuss ay yung talagang yun yung mga lumalabas o paulit-ulit na lumalabas sa ating board exam. Okay, so I think are we all set? Ready na tayong lahat? Okay, please take note class no sa mga important key terms na aking i-discuss. Carbohydrates class no, these are hydrates or of aldehydes or ketones that derive based on the location of CO functional group. Okay? So mapansin nyo class pag carbohydrates, ang nilalagay ko lang is CHO. Yan. Because class, your carbohydrates contains carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen or CHO. Okay? So CHO. As you can observe here, we have glucose, galactose, and fructose. Pansin niyo class, um, ang kanilang structures, no? Meron lang talagang carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. That's it. That's carbohydrates. So, hindi na ako mag-deepen is discuss about carbohydrates na mga structure, isomerism. Dahil class, alam kong na-discuss na ninyo yan sa inyong biochemistry. Okay? Hindi ako nagkakamali na na-discuss na talaga ninyo ito sa inyong biochemistry. Just a review class, there are different types of carbohydrates. We have monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. Pag sinabing monosaccharides class, it only contains one sugar molecule. Pag sinabing disaccharides class, ito ay nagko-contain ng two sugar molecules. Pag sinabi naman nating oligosaccharides class, it contains 2 to 10 sugar molecules. Pag sinabing polysaccharides class, it contains 10 or more sugar molecules. Please don't forget that. Glycolaldehyde class, alam ba ninyo na ang glycolaldehyde, siya ang pinaka-simplest form of carbohydrates. Dahil tingnan nyo ang kanyang structure class, di ba? Simple siya. But don't forget that your glycolaldehyde is the simplest form of carbohydrates. Pag sinabing glucose class, pag-isulat naman sa ating comment section class para naman ma-practice ang inyong kamay. Isulat ang glucose na words. Okay? Isulat ang glucose na word dyan sa ating comment section. Pag sinabing glucose class, ito yung pinaka-common talaga class no, na ating ini-intake every day. Dahil kung walang glucose class, wala tayong source of energy. Alam nyo ba class that ang glucose is the only carbohydrates to be directly used for energy or stored as glycogen? Alam nyo ba yun? Okay, very good no, for your participation. Marinig nyo ba ako, class? Marinig nyo ba ako? Patricia Nicole and Matthew, okay ba?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sounds okay. Oo, kasi sa internet connection. Pero hopefully, no, please bear with me. Okay, at least masabtan. Pero kung dili gud masabtan ha, or total na gid kayo, please remind me, Patricia, na makadiri sa live stream. Okay. Yan, carbohydrates or glucose. Okay, sige class. Class, alam ba ninyo na ang glucose class is automatically, no, isa siya na carbohydrates class na that is directly used for energy. Unlike other carbohydrates, just like your starch. Okay? So, kailangan pa siya i-digest more bago siya ma-form of energy. But ang glucose natin class is directly used for energy or stored as glycogen. It does not accumulate in the muscles. Okay, please don't forget that your glucose does not accumulate in the muscle. It does not enter the muscle cell freely, and when it enters the cell, with the help of insulin, it is quickly metabolized. Class, dili lang na siya basta-basta mosulod sa imong mga cells ha ang atong glucose. Kailangan niya og partner or kailangan niya uyab, which is ang pangalan sa iyang uyab kay si insulin. Yan. The brain class is completely dependent on blood glucose for energy production. 2/3 of your glucose class utilization in resting adults occurs in your central nervous system. Okay? So class, imagine class ha, 2/3 of your glucose class utilizes by your brain. So class, mapansin niyo class during examination, magsakit jud ang imuhang ulo, grabe kasakit ang imong ulo. Kaya nga naman class, grabe gamit og imo og carbohydrates or glucose ang imuhang brain. So as a quick tip, kailangan natin class meron tayo mga chocolates or other form of sugar no na kailangan nating kakainin during examination, during your board examination. Don't forget to bring some chocolates or other form of sugars para naman hindi sasakit yung inyong ulo. Okay. Let's talk about carbohydrate metabolism. Okay? Let's talk about carbohydrate metabolism. Pag sinabing metabolism, paki-comment naman dyan sa ating comment section. What is the layman's term for metabolism? Okay, para masabtan sa uban unsa day na metabolism, no? Sige, paki-comment naman diyan sa ating comment section no ano bang ibig sabihin ng metabolism. Okay? Ano kaya metabolism na pinagsasabi natin, no? Ano kaya yan siya? Okay, ano kaya yung metabolism na sinasabi natin? Okay, sige, wala pa ba nakasagot? Okay, ano ba ang ibig sabihin pag sinabi nating metabolism? Okay, guys, I know that all of protein metabolism na discuss na ninyo sa inyo. Yes, sabi pa ng iba, breakdown, okay? Kung sa ma-breakdown ang atong carbohydrates, no? Gidiscuss na sa inyong classmate. Let's review the hapon, no? Okay. During a fast, okay, kana naga-fasting ta, wala talaga blood glucose level is kept constantly by mobilizing the glycogen stored in the liver. During long fasting class, gluconeogenesis is required to maintain blood glucose level because glycogen stores are used up in about 24 to 48 hours. Class, kung wala tay kaon class, halimbawa 8 hours, wala tay kaon, natay ginatawag nga ang mga glycogen mo na ginatawag nato nga mga stored glucose dara sa ato ang liver. Pero kung dili na gyud makaya class, abtan na mo utulok adlaw nga way kaon, that's what we call gluconeogenesis. Kasi class, gina-consume na class sa imo, wala na hotda naman ka og glycogen. Ang next nga target class is your amino acids or mga proteins nato. Iha nang himuon, i-convert na niya into glucose. Yan. An individual with a fasting blood glucose level of greater than 100 mg per dl is referred to as hyperglycemic. Please don't forget that. If an individual with a fasting blood glucose level naman is less than 50 mg per dl, it is referred to as a hypoglycemic. Glucose metabolism class generates pyruvic acid, lactic acid, and acetyl coenzyme A. Please don't forget ha, huwag kakalimutan class, baka lumabas sa exam, no, sa mga quizzes natin, na ang end product or ang products ng glucose metabolism are the following. We have the pyruvic acid, the lactic acid, and acetyl coenzyme A as an intermediate products. The complete oxidation of glucose yields carbon, hindi yan siya carbon ha, paki-correct, carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. Ito na class ang ating carbohydrates breakdown. Say for example, si Patricia Nicole. Oh, ito na lang, no? Gagawin natin example, ito si Monique kasi paragi lang ito nag-exercise, no? Monique, kamusta ang exercise natin dyan, no? Yung 12 hours exercise mo, kamusta ba? Successful ba? Okay? Say for example, after nag-exercise si Monique, gikapoy siya, no? Namalit siya og 1 kilo nga kuan kanang suman. Isa gyud ka kilo nga suman. Or usa kay ang favorite ni Monique nga pagkaon? Sige daw, paki-comment sa comment section. Ano kaya ang favorite ni Monique na pagkain? Yan. Sige. Ano kaya ang favorite na pagkain, no? Okay, say for example, Chicken Joy na lang, no? Sa Jollibee. O, Chicken Joy. Abot sa bakba ni Monique, pagkaon niya sa rice with chicken, automatically mag-release ta og ginatawag nga salivary amylase na enzyme. Yan. Okay, nag-release siya ng salivary amylase. Automatically, class, ang carbohydrates, no? Convert na niya. Iyahan na ikat-chap-chapo na niya. Pero, class, no? Pag ang imuhang ginakaon, class, just like dextrose or maltose, kanang naay mga starch, okay? Just like kanang with fibers, okay? Dili na siya automatically ma-divide into glucose, no? Or di na siya automatically nga ma-divide lang sa imong bakba. But in your stomach, class, or your intestine, we have another enzyme. We have a pancreatic amylase. Diyan na, class, tinutulungan, class, no? Na ma-divide, class, ang imuhang carbohydrates, class, into single form, into a monosaccharide. Okay? So pagdating dyan sa ating intestine, class, no, i-absorb na yan siya via intestinal mucosa, then delivered to your muscles, and pag sobrang-sobra talaga, class, delivered to your liver to be stored. Yan. Okay? So in the form of glycogen. Okay? So yun. Sige. Lagi nag-comment sa favorite ni Monique. Hindi nila kaila si Monique. Okay? So what is the ultimate goal of your carbohydrates, no? Is to convert glucose to carbon dioxide and water with ATP as the byproduct. Kasi, class, alam natin na ang ATP is yun yung ginagamit ng ating mga cells as a form of energy. So, kumbaga siya yung pagkain ng mga cells para magkaroon tayo ng energy. That's the reason why nga pag-ising natin ng umaga, we have an energy to wake up early in the morning and we have also an energy to study. Pag wala tayong energy, class, so meaning kulang ang ating source of glucose. So kailangan na natin kumain. Okay? So wag mag-overfast. Kaya nga naman, mamayataan na. Okay. What are the possible channels? Converted to liver, glycogen, and stored, and metabolized as carbon dioxide and water, and converted to keto acids, amino acids, and proteins. As well as converted to fats and stored in an adipose tissue. Yan na yung ating mga bilbil or ating mga love handles. Okay, let's talk about or let's review about the biochemical pathways in carbohydrate breakfast. Okay, so class, Embden-Meyerhof pathway. Okay, so it converts glucose to pyruvate or lactate. Please don't forget, class, ha, pakisulatan or pakisulat sa inyong mga notes. Pag sinabing Embden-Meyerhof pathway, class, ang glucose, class, i-convert niya into pyruvate or lactate. This is the primary energy source of humans. Okay, this is the primary energy source for humans, your pyruvate or lactate. While to your hexose monophosphate shunts, oxidizes glucose to ribose and carbon dioxide. It also produces NADPH as an energy source. Pag ang hexose monophosphate shunt, class, gina-oxidize niya ang glucose to ribose and carbon dioxide. While sa Embden-Meyerhof pathway, class, ang glucose, class, is i-convert niya into pyruvate or lactate, which is, this is the primary source of your energy. What is glycogenesis? Glycogenesis, class, converts glucose to glycogen. Please don't forget genesis in the beginning, right? Beginning. Glyco, so meaning it's sugars. Okay? Glycogen. Okay? Sugar. So glycogenesis. Meaning, class, i-convert niya, class, ang glucose into glycogen. Okay? Please don't forget that terms. Okay, another metabolism, class, no, is your glycolysis. This is the conversion of glucose and other hexoses into lactate or pyruvate, glycolysis, or the breakdown of glucose for energy production. Okay, glycolysis. Glycogenesis, the conversion of glucose into glycogen, usually found in your liver, no? Diyan kina-convert ang ating glucose into glycogen as well as to your muscle. Alam nyo ba, class, na ang mga sobra-sobra nga mga glucose, class, nga dili magamit sa imuhang kalawasan, kay mo adto na siya diretso sa imuhang liver. Okay? To be stored as in the form of glycogen. Plus, please don't forget baka lumabas sa inyong mga quizzes or sa exam. Kasi class, sa aming board exam before, ano daw ang tawag class sa glucose na na-stored sa iyong liver? The correct answer is glycogen. Okay? There are also high concentrations of glycogen in the liver as well as into your skeletal muscle. Okay, please don't forget that there is a presence of or the high concentration presence of glycogen in your liver as well as to your skeletal muscles. Glycogen also class is quickly accessible storage form of glucose. Glycogenolysis occurs when plasma glucose is decreased. Class, alam nyo ba, pag lower na ang ating glucose sa ating blood, class, no? Say for example, hindi pa tayo kumain, nag-fasting pa tayo, class, especially kung sino yung nagpa-fasting. During night time, di ba? How many hours tayo mag-fast? Grabe, kain tayo 8 p.m. in night. Okay? Then matutulog tayo. So wala tayong stored glucose na niyan, no? Wala na tayong glucose niyan. So, pag kulangan ang ato ang body o glucose class, kaya nga naman during night time, just like Monique, nag-exercise pa siya, kailangan dyan niya og excess glucose. Kailangan dyan niya og sobra-sobra nga glucose. Kaya nga naman, ang source of energy nato kay glucose man. So, si Monique, mag-exercise siya 12 midnight. Mahuman siya alas 5 sa buntag. O, grabe yun. So, wala siya kaon-kaon. So, mag-perform siya og glycogenolysis o gilyse na niya ang imong glycogen which is the storage of glucose. Occurs quickly class if additional glucose is needed and this is controlled by hormones and enzymes. Gluconeogenesis class, this is the formation of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources such as your amino acids, your proteins, ha, yun yung sinasabi ko class. Pag walang-wala ka na talagang source of glycogen, kay nahurot na, kay pila nakakaadlaw nga nag-fasting, wala yun kay kaon-kaon class, almost 3 to 5 days class, wag yun kay kaon-kaon, halimbawa lang na siya ha, tubig lang ang imong ginainom class, no? So, in the form of gluconeogenesis, in which you are performing class conversion of carbohydrates from non-carbohydrates form, just like your proteins, glycerol, and fatty acids. Ang ato, no? It also occurs mainly in your liver. Okay, pabalik-balik na lang itong glycogenolysis class. Breakdown of glucose from glucose. Of course, yung plasma glucose is decreased. Yan. Please don't forget, class, ha, that there are four major glucose metabolism. We have glycolysis, glycogenesis, gluconeogenesis, and glycogenolysis. Please don't forget that terms, okay? Para class, nganong gibalik-balik na ko ni kay mo ni ang pabalik-balik ng mga terms na ginagamit natin during our discussion. Class, there are also related terms, class. We have the lipogenesis. Oh, lipogenesis. Ano naman yung mga genesis, no? Mga beginning, yun ba? This is the conversion of carbohydrates into fatty acids. Fat is another energy source, storage form, but not as quickly accessible as glycogen. O, di ba? So, sino yung may mga bil-bil dyan? Taas naman ang kamay, okay? So, advertisement. Comment naman dyan sa ating comment section kung sino ba yung may mga bil-bil dyan, no? Na maraming mga storage. So, don't be depressed kay nga nung daghan ka og mga bil-bil daraa or mga taba-taba. Kay nga naman, class, these are also a source of energy. So, don't be depressed, no? Huwag kayong ma-depress. Mahala, uy, unsa man ako kalawasan. Uy, pila na ko ka years ba? Sige na kong diet. Wala man gihapon ko nagapayat. Oh. So, don't you worry on that, class, ha? Dahil makakatulong talaga yan siya sa ating katawan. Okay? Pag wala na gid mo'y ginakaon, pag wala pa ginapadala si mama nga allowance nato, pwede nato gamiton ang atong mga storage spots daraa. Okay? Lipolysis plus the decomposition of fats. So, kung kailangan na nimo ang fats, no? Kailangan na nimo ang source of energy, you can use lipolysis. Sum or net of all of these processes determines the level of blood glucose. Yeah. So, describe the role of the liver in the maintenance of glucose levels. So, ano ba ang role ng ating liver? So, the role of your liver is to maintain the glucose levels by glycogenesis, converts glucose to glycogen. Okay. So, regulations of plasma glucose. Paano ba gina-regulate ang ating plasma glucose? By your organ or systems involved in glucose regulations? Ano ba yung mga organs or systems involved in your glucose regulations? Number one, class, you have your liver. If you have a lot of glucose class, your glucose will be converted into glycogen. Pag wala na naman tayong glucose class dahil nag-deprive tayo class, hindi tayo kumain class during lunchtime, we will be performing. Ano yung class na performing? Okay, ano yung process class to perform glycogen into glucose? Sige daw class, paki-comment naman dyan sa ating comment section class, no? Kung ano ba ang procedure, ano ba ang glucose metabolism class na magpe-perform pag wala na tayong glucose class, no? Glycogen class, i-convert niya into glucose. Sige class, paki-comment naman dyan sa ating comment section. Ano ba yung term? No? Ano ba yung method class na conversion of glucose into glycogen? Yan, glycogenolysis. Yan, okay. So, ang gluconeogenesis class ha, hindi gluconeogenesis. Kasi class, ang gluconeogenesis, hindi glycogen ang kaniyang gina-perform. Ang ginagamit niya class pag gluconeogenesis is yung ating mga proteins, other and amino acids, fatty acids, yun. Okay? So please don't forget class ha, paki-review ang ating slides class. Later on, I will be sending the slides class. Please review the difference between gluconeogenesis, glycogenolysis. Ay wag talaga ninyo niyang kakalimutan class. Please, please, please paki-review kasi lalabas talaga yan sa inyong mga quizzes, exam, and everything. Okay? So always remind us na lalabas talaga yan sa inyong mga exam. Okay class, your muscle class, no? Siya, skeletals, and heart, dyan nasa-stored ang ating mga glucose. Your pancreas class, nag-sensitize tayo ng hormones, just like your insulin class, para bubaba ang glucose level ng ating katawan. And of course, the glucagon naman, and somatostatin, para tumaas ang level ng ating glucose sa ating katawan. And other endocrine glands, just like your anterior pituitary glands, adrenal glands, thyroid glands. Yan. Okay. So, if plasma glucose is decreased, okay, sige, it's a review. If plasma glucose is decreased, ano gani yung mangyayari, class? Naka-answer na kayo kanina. We have glycogenolysis, okay? The liver releases glucose into the plasma. This is a quick response. Gluconeogenesis and lipolysis class is the secondary response na class. Pag walang-wala na talaga class, glycogen stored sa inyong liver. Pag plasma naman natin ay mataas, okay? Pag plasma glucose is increased, ang gina-perform ng ating liver class is your glycogenesis. Okay? Genesis, formation of glycogen. From the glucose, nasobraan og asukal, nasobraan og carbohydrates, kay nasobraan og kaon sa mga it-ulyukan, naga-perform tayo class ng glycogenesis. Pag nasobraan jud class, no, wala nagyoy taguanan sa imuhang liver, dira na mosunod si lipogenesis, the formation of lipids. That is the reason why daghan taog mga bilbil. Okay? So, para mawala ang bilbil, kailangan i-perform, mag-exercise ta para ma-consume sa inyong kalawasan ang inyong excess na carbohydrates. Okay, let's move on, class, for your glucose regulation. Okay, class, what hormone class will performing, decreasing your glucose levels? Ano ba ang hormones class na magdi-decrease ng ating glucose level? Paki-comment naman dyan sa ating comment section class. Anong hormone ang magpapababa ng ating glucose level? Sige, isulat ka sa ating comment section. On very good, insulin class from the beta cells of your Langerhans. Okay, insulin. Kailangan class ng insulin class, no, that has been released to your beta cells of your islets of Langerhans. Actions class is responsible for the entry of glucose to the cell, thereby decreasing glucose in the blood. Glycolysis increase glycogenesis. Yan. Relative importance, primary response. Pag mababa na ang glucose ng ating blood, okay, sa ating blood, ano yung pinakaunang hormone na re-release pa rin ng ating pancreas class? Okay, that will increase the glucose level. I-comment naman dyan sa ating comment section. Ano yung hormone class? Ano yung hormone na nagpapataas ng ating insulin, na ating glucose level sa ating blood circulation? I-comment sa ating comment section kung ano yun siyang hormone na yon. So it has been also released by your pancreas. And very good. The primary response class is your glucagon from the alpha cell. Kung si beta cells is your insulin, si alpha cells naman is your glucagon. Its action class is to stimulate glycogenesis and gluconeogenesis. It inhibits glycolysis. Relative importance class is your primary, no? Primary response itong ating glucagon. Wala ng glucagon class, kay kapoy na good class, we have other form of responses. The secondary response, cortisols. Actions class is insulin antagonist. Plus, pakicomment naman dyan sa ating comment section. Ano ba ang ibig sabihin in layman's term ang sinatawag na antagonist? Antagonist. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng antagonist in layman's term? Okay, in Bisaya ha or in Tagalog. Ano ba ang tawag ibig sabihin ng antagonist? Sige. Dahil sabi dito na antagonist daw, so meaning yan, may nakasagot na no, si Laika, kalaban, no? Kalaban sila ni insulin. Okay? Si cortisol, kalaban sila. Kasi si insulin, pagpababa o glucose, si cortisol, pangpataas o glucose. Yan, kontrabida, kalaban, o. Okay? So, kung si insulin, ang bida, ang kalaban, si glucagon. Right, si glucagon is another form of antagonist kasi pinapataas niya ang ating glucose. Yan. Okay, very good. And in ahas, sabi pa ni Matthew, ahas daw. Okay, thank you so much for your participation. Okay, so yan. Please don't forget the secondary response. We have also epinephrine. Okay. Sino na ba dito class ang naka-experience, no? Sino na ba dito ang naka-experience na yung time na nasunugan or may lindol, no, na nakarga ninyo yung refrigerator, ang inyong refrigerator or ang inyong mga bukat kay nga mga bagay, no, nakarga ninyo dayon. So that's a response of your epinephrine as well as your norepinephrine. Kasi as yung norepinephrine as well our epinephrine class is another form of is an antagonist of your insulin class that will increase your glucose. Because its action is to promote glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. Relative importance class secondary. Question, sir, anong mataas mo makusgan mata sir, no? Anong makusgan mata sir during that scenario, no, na mga linog, na mga bagyo, ano makarga man nato. Imagine, pag epinephrine, automatically i-increase niya ang production of your glucose. So meaning daghan kay kaog energy. Okay? Daghan kay kaog energy. 'Di ba pag daghan kay kag energy, oh yan, fight or flight response. Thank you so much. Okay. Hala, oo, putol-putol. Adrenaline rush. Okay. Wala, putol-putol ko. Okay, wait lang ha. Patricia Nicole, hello, mic test. Adre, putol ba ako karon?
Opo, sir.
Oy, hala, naunsa na putol-putol naman ta, oy. Kani, putol-putol pa?
Wala lang, ay di na kayo, sir.
Okay, sige, sorry kaayo ha. Sorry kaayo kung putol-putol ta. Hello, mic test. 1, 2, 3. Patricia, okay na?
Medyo okay na, sir.
Okay, medyo okay na. Okay, medyo okay na. Ito kaya, Patricia. Murag sa mic yun siguro, oo. Ito, Patricia, okay.
Okay na, sir. Okay na, sir.
Okay, sige. Okay? Oo, basi sa mic yun siguro. Okay. Hello, mic test. 1, 2, 3. Okay na, Patricia?
Opo, sir.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And we have also epinephrine promotes glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. O, di ba? So that's the reason why class nga nung paspas kayo ta makalihok class dahil increase ang production ng ating oxygen, glucose. Yan. Growth hormones class or somatostatin from the delta cells, action insulin antagonist inhibits glucagon excretion. The relative importance is secondary. We have also thyroxine, increased glucose absorption from your GI tract, stimulate glycogenolysis. Relative importance class. Okay. Renal threshold. Class, pag sinabing renal threshold, ano ba yung ibig sabihin? Okay? Pag sinabing renal threshold class, ano ba yung ibig sabihin? In layman's term lang ha, huwag na kayong mag-research dyan sa Google. Okay? Just write it in layman's term. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng renal threshold? Kasi alam ko, na-discuss na ninyo itong renal threshold sa inyong clinical microscopy. Okay? Alam kong na-discuss na ninyo ito, ang inyong renal threshold sa inyong clinical microscopy. Sige, pag-i-comment naman dyan sa ating comment section, ano bang ibig sabihin ng renal threshold? Yan, limit ng kidney. Very good. Okay, limit ng kidney. Okay, sabi niya red one, limit daw. Okay, class. Every metabolites class, no, or every analytes class, meron talaga yan siyang limit. Kung masubraan ang imuhang halimbawa class, no, na alam tayo required na glucose. Pag masubraan man gud na class, there are instances nga dili na makaya og filter sa imong kidney, iyaha na lang ng igawas. So that's the reason why naatay makit-an nga glucose sa inyong urine. Okay, question, follow-up question class. What is the renal threshold for your carbo or glucose? Okay, and mg per dl ha, I want it in range. Ano ba yung range or ng renal threshold ng inyong glucose class? Ano ba ang renal threshold ng inyong glucose class, no? Na kumbaga, kung kana nga value class, iyahan ng i-excrete, no? Iyahan ng ipagawas sa imong ihi. Okay? Sige, pag-i-comment. Yan, very good. May nakasagot na. We have 160 mg, 180 mg per dl. That's the renal threshold of your glucose. Okay? Plus, if blood glucose is elevated, appear in urine, that is what we call a condition, glucosuria. The renal threshold class is 160 to 180 mg per dl class. Kaya kung musubra na siya class, no, igawas na siya sa imuhang ihi ang imuhang glucose. Thank you so much. At least karon daghan na ang naminaw, no? Naabot na ta og 40 ka mga participants. Kay ganiha na alang sa 25. Okay. Okay, thank you so much for that, for your participations class. I want you to listen very carefully class dahil ito talaga ang pinaka-importante sa lahat, ang carbohydrates, proteins, non-protein nitrogens, and lipids. Ito yung mga important na dapat ninyong malaman. Okay, please don't forget that. Let's move on to the next topic class, the measurement of carbohydrates. Okay, paano ba natin gina-measure ang ating carbohydrates or glucose? Let's start with number 1 or the requirements. Okay, fasting glucose in whole blood is 15% lower than the serum or plasma. I think na-discuss na ito ng inyong reporters kanina. This is just a review na lang. The standard clinical specimen is venous plasma glucose. Please take note of that. Question number 1, what is the standard specimen used in your plasma, in your glucose detection? Letter A, serum. B, plasma. Okay, the correct answer is plasma. Please don't forget that. But commonly na ginagamit talaga sa laboratory class is serum. Okay, so sige lang. But in your board exam, the correct answer is venous plasma ha. Plasma talaga ha. Okay, class, always remember that venous blood glucose is 7 mg per dl lower than capillary blood due to tissue metabolism. Capillary blood glucose is same with arterial blood glucose level. Wow, amazing ha? Venous blood glucose daw is 7 mg per dl lower than capillary blood due to tissue metabolism. And always remember that your arterial blood glucose as well as your capillary blood glucose is the same level. Okay, the same na kanyang concentration. CSF glucose concentration should be approximately 60% of the plasma concentration. Peritoneal fluids glucose is same with plasma glucose. Plasma glucose level increase with age fasting, no, 2 mg per dl per decade habang nagatigulang taklas nagataas ko naman to ang level glucose level. Postprandial 4 mg per dl per decade, glucose challenge 8 to 13 mg per dl per decade. Class, specimen handling and storage. Paano ba natin kinahawakan at ini-stored ang ating plasma glucose? Alam nyo ba, class, that at room temperature, 20 to 25 degrees Celsius, class, glycolysis decreases glucose by 7 mg per dl per hour in normal and centrifugal coagulated blood. Class, there are some instances, class, na sa board exam, bibigyan kayo ng scenario. Say for example, class, you have a sample, ang sample class no, na stored nimo class for almost 2 hours. Unseparated, wala nimo siya na separate class sa imuhang red blood cells. Okay? Class, say for example, na condition, no? Ang blood daw class na stored for 2 hours. Okay? Unseparated blood stored for 2 hours. And ang measure sa machine class is 120 mg per dl. So class, meaning class, dili na siya correct ang iyang result. Kaya nga naman class, na-stored ba nimo siya class at room temperature for almost 2 hours. And always remember that in every hour class, na ay pagbaba o 7 mg per dl per hour. So, the correct answer class is dili yun siya 120 mg per dl. The right answer is add nimo og 14 mg per dl. Kaya naman class, every hour class na ay 7 mg per dl per hour ang iyahang deduction or pagbaba sa glucose. Dahil class, i-consume sa inyong mga red blood cell ang glucose. Alam, buhi ba ng red blood cell? So, nagkakaon po sila og glucose. So, class, mag-add ka 7 mg per dl plus 7 mg per dl, meaning class, 14 mg per dl. 120 plus 14 mg per dl, the correct answer is 134 mg per dl. So, meaning class, ang imong gihayatan na result is incorrect or mali yun siya. Kaya naman class, na-consume naman sa imuhang red blood cells. Okay, so naintindihan class? Okay, thank you so much. Paki-comment naman dyan sa comment section class if naintindihan na ang computation ng ating glucose consumption. Okay, paki-comment naman dyan sa ating comment section. 1, pag naintindihan. 2 naman, pag hindi naintindihan. Okay, 2 pag hindi naintindihan. Okay, so just add 7 mg per dl per hour class ha, if pila ka oras siya na stored. Okay? Pero class, immediately, as advised, pag nakuha ang blood, just centrifuge, then separate para class dili ma-consume sa inyong mga red blood cells. Very good. Let's continue, class. Let's continue. At refrigerated temperature, imagine class ha, even gi-refrigerate na ang inyong sample class. Even gi-refrigerate na inyo. Grabe yun ni ka, si glucose, no? Ref class ang imong sample 4 degrees Celsius class at about 2 mg per dl per hour nihapon class ang deduction. 2 mg per dl per hour ang deduction pag imuha siyang i-ref. In short, pagkuha og dugo, diretso centri process. Dili na paabtan og 5 ka oras, 3 ka oras bago i-process. Correct? Okay, please don't forget that. Glucose test. Next class. Long-term specimen storage, even negative 20 degrees Celsius, glucose levels decrease significantly and progressively. Yan. Laboratory testing class, let's start.
Sir,
Yes?
putol-putos may nagahina ang audio mo po, sir.
Uy, okay. Sige ha. Let's check again. Ano naman ito? Yan. Okay, ito. Okay na, Patricia? Yan. Ito, Patricia. 1, 2, 3, Mike.
Putol-putol po, sir.
Ito. Hello? Yan. Ito, Patricia.
Okay na, sir. Okay na, sir.
Thank you so much, ha? Thank you so much. Yan. Okay, let's move on, class, for laboratory testing, class. Glucose preservation, class, perform testing less than 1 hour after collection. Separate plasma cells less than 1 hour cells, class, ha? Cells continue to utilize glucose at the rate of 10 mg per dl per hour or 7 mg per dl per hour. Plus, there are some references, class, na nagsasabi 10 mg per dl per hour. But the standard, class, or yung sa Henry's natin, class, may ang nakalagay talaga, class, is 7 mg per dl. Okay? So refrigeration slows the process. Collect blood in sodium fluoride tube, great tube fluoride inhibits glycolysis. Okay? So if hindi talaga maiwasan, class, ha? If hindi talaga maiwasan, class, kailangan ninyong i-store or dugayan pagid mo, class, just collect your blood using sodium fluoride or the gray top tube. But always remember, dili kaayo available ng gray top tube sa laboratory. Please bear in mind, wala gyud mga gray top tube sa laboratory kay perting mahala na siya. So the remedy is that just centri automatically your blood sample after na-clot na ang blood. Specimen collection, you can use whole blood, POCT, point of care testing. Yan. Results are at 11% lower than plasma or serum. Serum, plasma, and other specimen types, we have CSF and urine. Always remember, class, that CSF specimen, you must analyze it as soon as possible because glucose is 60 to 70% of patient's current blood level. CSF glucose in fasting class or in a non-diabetic class at 40 to 70 mg per dl. Decreased CSF glucose value suggests bacterial meningitis. Okay? Pag mababa ang level, class, ng inyong glucose level, always remember that 60 to 70% class, ha, ang glucose level nga makita sa inyuhang CSF compared sa inyuhang bloodstream. But class, pag mababa talaga, class, there are instances or there are possible bacterial infection or what we call meningitis. Kasi class, kinakain ng bacteria ang inyong glucose. Other specimen type, we have the 24-hour urine. Okay? What are the different sample used for glucose measurement? Okay, ito na yun, class. Now, we have the random blood sugar, class. It's a review na discuss na mga classmates niyo kanina. It is requested during insulin shock, hyperglycemic ketonic coma. Next, we have the fasting blood glucose. Fasting blood sugar or fasting blood glucose or FBS or FBG. Depende sa mga term. Pero mostly FBS. Napod sa US, class, mostly ang ginatawag nila FBG, fasting blood glucose. Non-per-orem, okay? Non-per-orem meaning wala sa kaon. At least 8 hours of fasting. Ideally, ha, 8 to 12 hours. But at least kung kung nagadali ang pasyente, ano, or kanang outpatient department, at least fast siya for at least 3 hours. These are most frequently ordered for the screening test for glucose metabolism. The reference value, class, is 74 to 106 mg per dl. Naapoy uban 70 to 110 mg per dl. Okay? So, depende na siya, class, kung unsa ang... Pero, class, just follow the reference range nga gi-share kanina nila Irvin, nila Matthew, na kinuha nila kay Bishop. Okay? Kay the same na sila, class, sa kay Henry's nga reference. Fasting values, class, if greater than 126 mg per dl, usually there is an indication of problem. Okay? Either diabetes mellitus na siya. FBS should be repeated on another day to confirm diagnosis. Greater than 126 mg per dl, there is an indication, class, na diabetes mellitus. Pero, class, dili pa na siya confirmed. You have another test na naman, class, no? Another or next week, pwede na po ka magpa-perform ng FBS to confirm kung naabagid kay diabetes mellitus. Borderline diabetes may have a normal FBS and may need a challenge test to demonstrate abnormality. Next, class, we have the 2-hour postprandial blood sugar test. 2-hour postprandial blood sugar, class. Patient has FBS drone. So, ito yung piniperform, class. So, di siya advisable for confirmation for diabetes. Kaya nga naman, class, diri na tumabalaan, class, kung ang insulin nato nagagana ba o wala. Okay? So, number 1, class, patient has FBS drone. So, dapat mag-fasting gihapon. Then after fasting class, painomon ka og juice nga 75 grams or pakaunon ka og breakfast nga 75 grams lang of carbohydrates. Or next has repeated glucose after 2 hours. Glucose levels should have returned to fasting levels. Is greater than 200 mg per dl on the postprandial test, a fasting or random glucose level should be performed on a subsequent day to diagnose with diabetes. Next class is your glucose tolerance test for your gestational diabetes para sa mga buntis. Pwede po ni siya ginagamit sa mga bata before, but right now, wala na siya gina-recommend na gamiton to diagnose diabetes sa mga bata. It is a multiple blood sugar test. Kaya naman class, kung bata class ang imong kuan, imagine, kuan ka ikaupat o ikatulo og dugo. Kaya nga naman class number 1, no? Okay, so it is used to determine how well the body metabolize glucose over a time. It should be performed to diagnose gestational diabetes. It is not generally recommended for routine clinical use in the diagnosis of diabetes. Kaya naman class, perting daghan nagtusok. Kaya naman number 1, tusok class. Number 1, tusok, mag-fasting ka at least 8 hours. Halimbawa, nag-fast ka alas 10, 8, 9, 10, 11, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or alas 5, nag-adto na ka sa hospital, gikuan ka. Painumon ka og glucose og 775 grams or 100 grams nga glucose or carbohydrates. Alas 5, gikuan ka. Pagka alas 6, kuhaan ka 6, 7, 8. Imagine plus, ikaupat ka kuhaan 3 hour. Napoy uba optional 2 hours. But mostly class ha, imagine kung ikaw tusukon, lingkuran lang na ha. Pagkuhaan ka, lingkod lang ka, hulat ka 1 hour, kuhaan. After 1 hour, kuhaan, dara lang ka, lingkod lang ka. After 1 hour, kuhaan. So that's the reason why wala na siya gina-recommend nga gamiton para sa diagnosis of diabetes. Kay luoy kay ang pasyente, especially mga bata. Okay? So, yan. Tala na siya sa mga buntis. Yan. So, there are problems ha. Ito yung mga problem encounter. Bakit dili na siya gina-recommend? Because class, patient must drink it, no, katong glucose, pero ang uban ginaluod. Keep it drawn, stay relatively inactive during the test period, and be successfully drawn on time. On time yun, dili pwede malagpas og 30 minutes. Patient directions very important, no, at least 3 days day prior to test. Dapat kung unsa to imong diet, regular diet, mao lang yung imong buhaton. Yan. Okay, so ito yung procedure class. Sige, basahin nyo na lang kasi i-summarize ko na kanina. Okay class, ito na yung summary of the result. Class, as you can observe, the abnormal result. First, fasting. Okay, nag-fast ka. Baba ang imong sugar. Nag-inom ka 75 grams of glucose. Normally, mo taas yun na siya after 1 hour. But, ang imong result, kung nakay diabetes class or gestational diabetes, mapansin nyo, habang tumatagal ang oras, tumataas ang glucose level. So, that's what we call abnormal result. But, pag normal result, fasting, taas, okay, what is the reason? Kasi class, kinakonsume kasi class, no? Kinokonsume ng iyong body. Kinokonsume ng iyong body ang glucose na na-intake mo. That is the reason why, habang tumatagal, bumababa talaga dapat yung trend. That is the ideal, no? Ideally, dapat bababa talaga yung trend. Bababa talaga yung trend ng ating, dapat bababa talaga ang trend. Okay? Bababa talaga ang trend. Pag normal. Kasi class, habang tumatagal, kinukonsume ng iyong body ang glucose na giinom mo. Okay? Next class is your glycated hemoglobin. Okay, what is the other name for your glycated hemoglobin? Pakisulat naman sa ating comment section. What is the other name for your glycated hemoglobin? Glycosylated hemoglobin. Naiwan na ako ang answer. Okay, sige, isulat na lang dyan, class, no? What is the other name for your glycosylated hemoglobin? Okay, what is the other name for your glycosylated hemoglobin? Okay, so it is also known, class, as your glycated hemoglobin. This which is the largest subfraction of normal hemoglobin A in both diabetic and non-diabetic individuals. It represents a weighted average of glucose levels, with the youngest erythrocytes contributing to a greater extent of the older one. Please remember, class, this has a long-term diagnosis for your ano yan, diabetes. Kasi class, dito natin malalaman class, no, if ikaw ay nagtitikal-tikal or nagatikal-tikal, nagatik-atik lang ka class, no, wala ka nagaingon og tinuod nga, oh, ma'am, sir, naga-diet ba ka og kuan, naga-diet ba ka og during 3 months time? Oh, oo, doc, naga-diet yun ko. So, di mo sa doktor kung nagatinikal ba ka o wala. Kaya nga naman, ang HbA1c test class, gina-measure niya ang 2 to 3 months period of your glucose level. So dira class, mabalaan jud kung naga-diet ba gyud ka, gi-follow ba nimo ang strict compliance ba, strictly complied ba ang imuhang diet o wala. Okay? So that is the reason why you need to comply kung unsang ginaingon sa doktor kay dili gyud ka makatakas sa ila if nag-diet ba ka o wala. Okay? So that's the test for glycosylated hemoglobin. Class, lumalabas yan siya sa board exam. Glucose molecules attaches non-enzymatically to the hemoglobin molecule. What is the advantage? Time average glucose, not subject to temporary variable due to diet and exercise. It does not require fasting. This is the only test class na dili na kailangan ng fasting. Of glucose. It also class influenced by the condition that affects the lifespan of the RBC such as sickle cell disease and hemolytic disease. Hemoglobin A1C class is the most commonly measured glycosylated hemoglobin. Yan. Specimen of choice ng ating glycosylated hemoglobin class is your EDTA. Okay, please don't forget that the specimen of choice for your glycosylated hemoglobin is your EDTA or EDTA. EDTA. Huwag sabihin ng EDTA ha, kay pambuki lang daw na siya. Kaya kung maabot daw ang US class or any part of the world, no, EDTA ang ginatawag, dili EDTA. No, mga Pinoy lang yun nag-ingon og EDTA. O, asa man kanang EDTA lang gamita. Okay, so please correct yourself. Use the word EDTA. Yan, okay? EDTA ang gagamitin natin na words in pronouncing these words, the EDTA. Measures by electrophoresis, enzymatic assays, and HPLC. Hemoglobin A1C class, the reference range is 6%. Greater than 6% class considered to be diabetes mellitus. For diagnosis of diabetes based on hemoglobin A1C result, the patient must have a result of greater than 6.5% confirmed by repeat measurements. Next class, we have also a fructosamine. Fructosamine class is also known as glycosylated or glycated or plasma protein ketoamine. Please don't forget the other term for fructosamine. It is the reflection of short-term glucose control 3 to 6 weeks. Plus kung ang ating HbA1c is the reflection of your glucose control for 2 to 3 months, meron din tayong 3 to 6 weeks of glucose control, which is the fructosamine. Huwag kakalimutan class sa inyong mga quizzes or exams sa board exam. May be also used for monitoring diabetes. Okay, ginagamit din ito class to monitor diabetes. Okay, and of course class, no, individuals also with anemia and hemolytic variance, hemoglobin S or hemoglobin C, decrease RBC lifespan. Okay class, sir, saan ba ito ginagamit, sir? Pag meron ba akong disease na mga hemolytic disease, sickle cell anemia, it's not advisable to perform HbA1c. Kasi, di ba, ang lifespan naman ng mga sickle cell, maliit lang talaga. So, the advisable use na method class para sa may mga sickle cells or yung sa mga hemolytic disease, okay? So, yun yung fructosamine. Kasi, 3 to 6 weeks of sugar control level, pwede nating malalaman dyan from the fructosamine test. Okay, so let's move on to our next topic class. Okay, so ito, it should be measured. Okay, it should be measured class. It should be measured in case of low plasma albumin, less than 30 grams per liter, low fructosamine. Methods: affinity chromatography, HPLC, and photometric. Relevance value or reference value class is 205 to 285 micromole per liter. Interferences class: high uric acid, triglycerides and bilirubin levels, and the presence of heparin or hemolysis. Yan. So those are mga interferences. Other related tests, we have ketones class, no? Okay, so ketones produced by the liver metabolism by products of fatty acids. Dito natin malalaman class if wala na yun, di ba? As I mentioned a while ago, pag naubusan na talaga tayo ng glycogen, naubusan na tayo ng glucose sa ating body, dun na, gina-perform na class ng gluconeogenesis. Meaning, ikainin na ng inyong body ang ating mga stored proteins, mga fats. So that's the reason why class, di ba? The end product of muscle degradation is your ketones. Okay? The end product of muscle degradation is your ketones. Okay? So that is the most commonly used also class, no? Pag mapansin niyo class, pag ang patient is a diabetic mellitus or with a diabetes class, mapansin niyo class, mapayat sila. Dahil class, gina-consume na ng body nila class ang inyong ang inyong protein. Kasi there are instances class na hindi na ma-consume ng inyong body ang inyong glucose dahil hindi na makapasok ang glucose sa ating katawan dahil sira ang ating insulin. Okay? So may problem ang ating insulin. And always remember, para makapasok ang insulin sa iyong katawan, you need to have, para makapasok ang glucose sa inyong katawan, you need to have an insulin. Pag may problem ang ating katawan, no, hindi siya maka-accept ng insulin. So meaning class, ang ipe-perform na ng ating body is gluconeogenesis. Gagamitin na lang ng body ang ating mga stored fats, ang ating mga muscle tissues, so that the end product of muscle degradation is ketone. So that's why we need also to test for ketones for diabetes mellitus. There are ketone bodies class. We have acetone, acetoacetic acid, and 3-beta hydroxybutyric acid. Increase of carbohydrate deprivation or decreased carbohydrates uses, diabetes mellitus, eye starvations or fasting, and prolonged vomiting. So ito yung increase, no? Mag-increase ang ketones natin plus during meron tayong diabetes mellitus, starvations or pagpa-fasting natin or prolonged vomiting. We have also class another test. We have a microalbumin. Microalbumin class persistent albuminuria in the range of 30 to 299 mg per 24 hours and albumin creatinine ratio of 30 to 300 mg per microgram. Indications of renal nephropathy. Assist in the diagnosis of early proteinuria. Normal urine dipsticks are insensitive to low concentrations of urine albumin. We have also class lactose tolerance test. Class dahil class ang iba sa ating class, no, meron tayong tinatawag na mga lactose intolerance. Meaning class, hindi sila class makaka-absorb ng mga lactoses, okay, or glucose or carbohydrates. So dito natin malalaman class, no, kung ano ba, meron ba siyang lactose intolerance or hindi. So ito yung test na ating gagamitin or lactose tolerance test. Okay, class, the procedure class, no, for lab evaluation is we will be performing oral glucose tolerance test using lactose, not glucose. As instead glucose ang ating gagamitin na ipainom sa ating client or sa ating pasyente, we will be using lactose as our agent na gagamitin natin. Okay, next class. Normally, the oral glucose tolerance test curve similar to OGTT, glucose level will increase 20 mg per dl above the fasting level. Lactase deficiency class, the curve of your result is flat curve, no very little increase in glucose level. So meaning class, flat lang siya, no? Flat. Meaning class, hindi na-absorb ng inyong katawan ang lactose. Therefore, there is a conclusion na ikaw po ay mayroong lactose intolerance, meaning hindi ka makaka-absorb ng lactose. Okay, so next natin is urine glucose class, no? The copper reduction test or cleaning test, this is not specific, detects all reducing sugar. So bakit question, sir, nga na di man siya specific? Because class, it also detects the all reducing sugar. So this is a specific test for glucose. Okay? Chemical method class, let's start with oxidation reduction method. We have number 1, the alkaline copper reduction method. Principal reductions of cuprous ion to cuprous ions forming cuprous oxides in hot alkaline solution by glucose. Plus, I have already made a table. This is your activity. Right? Napansin niyo class, no? The only reason class na pinagawa ko kayo class kasi dyan yung malalaman class ang mga reactions as well as the color reaction. Ito yung dapat niyong tandaan class ha. yung ating methods, the Pauline-Wu method, the Nelson-Somogi, Neo-Coprin method, and Benedict's method. Ang lumabas sa aming word exam class, ano daw ang end product ng Pauline-Wu at saka Nelson-Somogi? The answer is molybdenum glue. Okay, the correct answer is molybdenum glue, and the principle is copper reduction test. Please don't forget that. Alkaline ferric reduction method or Hagedorn-Jensen. The reaction of a yellow ferricide into colored is ferricide by glucose. This is an inverse colorimetry class. Next is the condensation method. Is orthotoluidine. Principal chemical Dobosky reaction. The reagent is orthotoluidine glacial acetic acid. The end product of your condensation method, which is the orthotoluidine method class, is your glycosamine color green. Next class, the enzymatic method class. This is the most commonly used in the laboratory, the enzymatic method. Acts on glucose but not on other sugar and not on the other reducing substances class. Number one class is your glucose oxidase class enzymatic. The color reaction class is orange brown. Measures the beta D glucose, also measures CSF glucose level. Yan. This is the glucose oxidase methodology, the Trindler reaction. It produces an oxidized glucose and water. Glucose oxidase class is an enzymatic method that will catalyze the reaction of glucose to gluconic acid with formation of hydrogen peroxide as a byproduct. Next class, good methodology. This is a good methodology, but naay rason, naay but. Procedure is good for blood and CSF specimen, but urine has too many interfering substances, subject to interference from ascorbic acid, bilirubin, and uric acid, which are also oxidized by peroxidase. Alternative way to determine concentration by polarigraphically. Measures the amount of oxygen used by the electron. Next method class, this is the reference method class and the most commonly used in the laboratory, which is the hexokinase method. This is the most specific glucose method class and the reference method. Plasma collected class using heparin, EDTA, fluoride, oxalate, or citrate, and many may be used by this test. Hexokinase method class, this is an enzyme that catalyzes the phosphorylation of glucose. This method can be very accurate and precise since the coupling reaction is specific. Time consuming for routine use. The reference methodology, since it lacks interferences associated with glucose oxidase method. Procedure can utilize blood, urine, and CSF. Yan. The end product class of hexokinase is your NADPH. Please don't forget that. NADP or dicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, or this is the oxidase form, is reduced. Plus, please don't forget plus the meaning of NADP, baka lumabas sa inyong mga quizzes or exam. The reduced form of your NADP is NADPH. Reduced form absorbs light of 340 nanometer proportional to the amount of glucose present in the first reaction. Always remember that elevated amount of ascorbate, bilirubin, ferric acid, glutathione, creatinine, L-cysteine values of glucose, no, will decrease your result. So hemolysis can also affect the hexokinase method. Mostly don't decrease level of glucose. Next method class is glucose dehydrogenase method. The amount of blood H generated is proportional to the glucose concentration. When glucose is measured using a glucose dehydrogenase method, glucose is reduced to produce a chromophore that is measured spectrophotometrically on an electric current. It provides result in glucose agreement with hexokinase procedure. Butyrotase is also added to shorten the time necessary to reach the equilibrium. Next class, interstitial. Interstitial ni class ha, glucose measuring device. It's used to continuous monitoring of glucose level in people with diabetes. Usually electrochemically method to automatically and frequently measures glucose level in the interstitial fluid for of dermis or subcutaneous fat tissue and require repeated calibration to plasma or whole glucose level. The result of this test provides information about glucose patterns over hours to days. This glucose trend analysis can reveal useful findings for modifying treatment such as unsuspected nocturnal hypoglycemia or postprandial hyperglycemia. Next class, we have dextrosticks or cellular strips na class na ginagamit sa laboratory class. Ito yung mga tips lang na ginagamit sa ating laboratory. Okay, class. Malapit na talaga, class, no? Clinical conditions of carbohydrate metabolism. Ano yung mga conditions, class, na nagkakaroon during carbohydrates metabolism. Next class, we called hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia class, this is an increase in blood glucose level. It is a toxic to beta cell function and impairs insulin secretion. Class, always remember na pag sobra bawal, pag maliit din bawal. Class, alam nyo ba na ang mataas na level ng or mataas na level ng glucose sa ating katawan is very toxic to your beta cells? Okay? Toxic siya kasi class, grabe siya og produce og insulin, no? Masobraan siya og produce og insulin. So that's the reason why kung di na makayanan class sa imong beta cells or the islets of beta cells of the islet of Langerhans class is ma-damage pod ang imuhang pancreas. So that's the reason class, no? The reason why na kailangan natin og mga artificial insulin. Mo na mag-inject na lang sila og mga insulin. Causes of your hyperglycemia class: severe infection, stress, dehydration, or pregnancy. Pancreatectomy, hemochromatosis, insulin deficiency, or abnormal insulin receptor. FBS level of greater than 126 mg per dl are called to be hyperglycemic. Laboratory findings for hyperglycemia class are the following: electrolyte imbalance, decreased sodium and bicarbonate, and of course increased potassium. Decreased blood and urine pH in the form of acidosis, ketones in serum and urine. Increased urine specific gravity. Bakit mataas ang specific gravity class? Dahil class sa presence of other analytes just like your carbohydrates or glucose class as well as your ketones in urine. And increased glucose in plasma and urine. Yan. Hyperkalemia. What is hyperkalemia? Increased potassium, no? This is the almost always present as a result of the displacement of potassium from cells in acidosis. Bicarbonate and total carbon dioxide are usually decreased due to cosmolkin respiration or deep respiration. O, naana po tayo another term, no? Term na atong nabalaan karon, early morning ingon mo sa imong mama or papa, mag-cosmolkin sa tama respiration. Unsa man na kanagong deep respiration, o di ba? So cosmolkin respiration or deep respiration class, no? Yan, okay? So there will be an increased total by carbon dioxide and bicarbonate pag magkakaroon tayo ng cosmolkin respiration or deep respiration. Class, any guess class, no? Ano naman ang level, no, ng ating blood pag hypoglycemia tayo or hypoglycemic tayo class? Ano naman ang level ng ating blood? Sige daw, paki-comment naman dyan sa ating comment section. Ano ba ang blood level ng ating blood? Ano ba ang level ng ating blood pag hypoglycemic tayo or hypoglycemia? Intelligent guess kung hindi nyo alam. Pero kung alam nyo, pakisulat naman dyan sa ating comment section kung ano ba ang level ng ating blood glucose level pag hypoglycemia tayo. Okay, so pakisulat naman dyan, class, doon na. Okay, sulat yun naman dyan, class, para naman hindi tayo naantok. I know naantok na tayo ngayon dahil maliit. Nagpe-perform na tayo ng glycogenolysis, no? Low level, okay. Low level, okay, ano yung level? Okay, so my question, ano yung level, mg per dl, pag hypoglycemic tayo? Okay, may nagsagot less than 100 mg per dl, may nagsagot din less than 70 mg per dl, no? Sabi ni Erwin, less than 70 mg per dl daw. Okay, so it is a result from imbalance between glucose utilization and production. Involves decreased glucose level and can have many causes. Diagnosis of hypoglycemia should not be made unless a patient meets the criteria of Whipple's triad. Class, ano po ang Whipple's triad? Class, comment naman dyan, no? Ano po ang ibig sabihin ng Whipple's triad? Or ano po itong Whipple's triad na to? To diagnose for hypoglycemia. Okay, ano ba tong Whipple's triad? Class, please comment naman dyan sa ating comment section. Ano ba ang Whipple's triad? So, class, magpa-participate na naman tayo ngayon para malaman ko, class, no, na hindi ba kayo natutulog ngayon sa aking klase. Alam ko, class, alam ko na masakit ang inyong ulo, but just keep going. Let's move on, no? Just keep going, class. Kailangan natin ngayon. Don't you worry, malaki na talaga tayo matapos kasi gusto ko talagang i-share to sa inyo. Yan, ito na, may sagot na si Sir Ces. Consists of number 1, symptoms of hypoglycemia. Number 2, hypoglycemia, blood glucose level of less than 50 mg per dl. And number 3, relief of symptoms following ingestion of glucose. Yan. Okay, class number 1, symptoms of hypoglycemia. Later on, i-discuss ko sa inyo ano yung mga symptoms ng ating hypoglycemia. Number 2, ang level niya, class, is less than 50 mg per dl. Pero, class, pagpakauno ni mo si Cerces o glucose, no, o mga chocolates nga, mga Toblerone, or any other form of glucose, class, katong mga symptoms nga katong mga wala na ang iyahang. So, that's what we call ayan. Okay? So, yan. Okay, mawala na ang iyang mga symptoms na daraha. Okay, so next class. Glucose triad class, ito na yon class, no? Low blood glucose concentration with typical symptoms elevated by glucose administration. Yan. Glucose tolerance test should be performed. Diagnostic test, MR glucose tolerance test. Okay. Hypoglycemic values less than 60 mg per dl or less than 70 mg per dl. Daghang mga references or less than 50 mg per dl. It strongly suggests hypoglycemia. 50 mg per dl or 55 mg per dl or 2.8 to 3.0 millimoles per liters, observable symptoms of hypoglycemia occur. Ano yung mga symptoms of hypoglycemia? Number 1, neurogenic tremors, palpitation, anxiety, and diaphoresis. Na-experience na ba mo, class? Question ako, class. Na-experience na ba mo karon og neurogenic symptoms, tremors, palpitation, nagapalpitate na bata? Yes or no? Okay? Pakisulat naman dyan sa ating comment section kung nagapalpitate na ba mo. Okay. Next is neuro. Glycopenic dizziness, tingling, blurred vision, confusion, and behavioral changes. Kasi karon class, nagabundak-bundak na mga plato dara karon kigipang gutom na mo, na blurred na inyong pananaw sa kuan, na siguro mga sungay-sungay no. Tanawan ninyo ako ng class basi na mga sungay. So that is the indication. Okay, yes, always no. No? Yes, so naka-perform. Yan. So class kung nakita na mog sungay karon dara nga duha, so meaning class gipanggutom na mo, advice nako adto sa mog kusina, kuha mog isa ka kamot nga sukal kaunon joke. Okay, peace. Okay, peace lang. Okay, eat your chocolates or sa dara or kape, mga sa tanan. Always remember that alcohol consumption can inhibit hepatic gluconeogenesis and increase glycogen phosphorylase activity, depleting hepatic glycogen stores and resulting in hypoglycemia. Class, kinsa ba mga palainom karon diri sa atong mga classmates? Okay, nabi nakainom diri class. No, always remember class that alcohol consumption class inhibits hepatic gluconeogenesis. Yon. Ha? Gina-inhibit niya ang gluconeogenesis class. Pag palainom kayo ta, wala ta naga-perform og gluconeogenesis. So that's the reason why, no, ang ato ang level of blood glucose is very low or hypoglycemia. So muna kung manginom mo, advice nato class ay pulutan. So dili dapat pulutan karne, dapat ang pulutan chocolate. No, chocolate sa atong pulutan para dili hypoglycemia. Okay? Yan. Okay, let's move on class, no? Let's move on. Hypoglycemia in the end-stage renal disease can be related to defective gluconeogenesis as well as an impaired hepatic glycogenolysis. Always remember that infants and children with a deficiency of cortisol and growth hormones are prone to develop hypoglycemia, especially during acute illness. Wow. Next, let's move on class to our diabetes mellitus. Okay, diabetes mellitus. There are different types of diabetes mellitus. Class, paki-comment naman dyan, class. What are the types? What are the types of diabetes mellitus? Paki-comment naman dyan sa ating comment sections. What are the different types of diabetes mellitus? Now na, okay? Okay, class, malapit na talaga class. Malapit na talaga tayong matapos class, no? Malapit na talaga class. Okay, paki-comment naman dyan sa ating comment section ano yung iba't ibang uri ng diabetes mellitus. Now na, let's start with number 1. Okay, very good. Type 1 and type 2 DM. Okay, class, diabetes mellitus. This is a group of metabolic disorder characterized by hyperglycemia resulting from defective and insulin secretions or insulin receptors or both. Fasting plasma glucose class concentration of greater than 126 mg per dl or more than one testings are diagnosed of diabetes class. Pag greater than or equal to 126 mg per dl plus, ha? Greater than 126 mg per dl plus, this is a sign that you have a diabetes mellitus. Okay? Dili lang isa ka test. Dapat 2 or more test ang atong buhaton. Karon nga week, patesta, greater than 126 mg per dl. Next week, for confirmatory talaga, if you have a type 1 diabetes or you have, sorry, hindi lang type 1 ha, type 2 diabetes kasi ang type 1 is para na siya sa mga bata, no? Mostly common in child. Okay. In severe diabetes mellitus, the ratio of beta hydroxybutyric acid or butyrate to acetate is 6:1. Classification of diabetes type 1, type 2, GDM, and other types. Class question number 1. What is the other name for type 1 diabetes? Yan. Okay, yan yung question ko. Paki-comment naman dyan sa ating comment section. Ano bang other name for your type 1 diabetes mellitus? What is the other name for your type 1 diabetes mellitus or formerly known as? Ano ba ang pangalan ng ating type 1 diabetes noong unang panahon? No, hindi pa siya type 1 diabetes. So there are other names na tinatawag ng ating type 1 diabetes. Ano yung formerly known as or other name ng inyong type 1 diabetes? Isulat dyan now na sa ating comment section para alam ng ating mga classmates, no? Ano kaya yun siya para hindi makalimutan? Other name of your diabetes is insulin-dependent diabetes, juvenile onset, meaning class, mga bata less than 20 years old, brittle diabetes class, kay kasi class, brittle diabetes, kay mga payaton ang mga bata sa unang class, no? Payaton sila, no? Ketosis-prone diabetes. Ketosis-prone diabetes class, this is a result of cellular-mediated autoimmune destructions of the beta cells of the pancreas. There are also genetic associations between type 1 diabetes class. Please don't forget that your HLA DR3 and DR4 are the major locus in the major histocompatibility complex of your chromosome number 6. Please don't forget the HLA DR3 and DR4 na located in your chromosome number 6. That is the reason why nga nung naa daw tayo juvenile diabetes, there are some discrepancies sa inyong chromosomes, no? Sa number 6 na inyong chromosome number 6. Always remember that 80 to 90% reduction in the volume beta cell is required to induce symptomatic type 1 diabetes. It is the only after most of the beta cells are destroyed that hyperglycemia develops. Signs and symptoms of type 1 diabetes plus kung natay 4 piece nga every year or every month ang atoong mga beneficiary sa 4-piece, no? Makuha og kwarta, naapoy 3-piece ang signs and symptoms sa ato ang diabetes. We have polyuria, palaging nag-iihi. Polydipsia, palaging nauuhaw. Polyphagia, palaging nagugutom. Sino kaya ang may symptoms niyan? So there is a sign na mayroon na tayong type 1 diabetes. Or these are also signs for your type 2 diabetes. Rapid weight loss, hyperventilation, mental confuse, and possible loss of consciousness. There are some possible complications like nephropathy, neuropathy, retinopathy, microvascular disorders. Okay, class, please don't forget na neuropathy, nephropathy, retinopathy, and microvascular disorder. Class, don't forget that. Don't forget, huwag kakalimutan yung mga complications na yan, ha? Huwag kakalimutan yung mga complications na yan. Okay, huwag kakalimutan ang complications as well as the signs and symptoms of your diabetes mellitus type 1. Next class, we have idiopathic, meaning unknown type, unknown ang origin. It is a form of type 1 diabetes that has no known etiology. This is strongly inherited. It does not have beta cells autoantibodies. The next class, type 2 diabetes. What is the other name for your type 2 diabetes? Pakisulat naman dyan sa ating comment section. What are the other name for your type 2 diabetes mellitus? Okay, what are the other name class of your type 2 diabetes mellitus? Sulat now na. Okay, sulat nyo agad ngayon class ang other name ng ating type 2 diabetes mellitus. Yan, sabi ni Erwin, non-insulin dependent diabetes. So mayroon pang another name, ha? Mayroon pang another term. Yeah, we have adult onset diabetes, meaning class sa mga katigulangon. Adult na ba mo, class? Adult na ba ta? Adult na ba mo? Okay, so adult na ba? Okay, so adult. Okay, so adult onset. Yan, adult meaning sa mga tigulang. Yan, formerly known as non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. Adult type maturity onset, DM, stable diabetes, ketosis resistant diabetes, receptor deficient diabetes mellitus. Those are the other name for your diabetes mellitus. Yan. And due to insulin resistance in the peripheral tissue, lack insulin receptor, or due to insulin secretory defects in beta cells. Insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, ang other name, a familial disease, meaning namamana talaga yan. Kung may diabetes si mama at papa, huwag mag-alala na ikaw rin ay may diabetes mellitus. Class, wala yun tayo skip anak class kasi papa may diabetes. Sure yun ko na ikaw na po kay diabetes because it is a familial disease. Most common type of diabetes class, ito ang type 2 diabetes. This is the most common type of diabetes manifest in adults at age of greater than 40 years old. More common in women. Oy, kita mga boys, very good. Safe the boys, no? Safe the boys pala mga boys dyan, no? Dahil safe tayo, dahil common lang daw to sa mga women. Ha? Okay, kayong mga men dyan, okay, palakpak naman kayo dyan, boys, no? Yung mga emoticon na clap, clap, clap natin dyan sa comment section, palakpakan niyo yung sarili dahil common daw to sa mga women. Pero don't you worry naman dyan, women, dahil common ito sa blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans. Kung may mga dugo kayo dito, no? Please be advised na diet na talaga tayo, not prone to ketoacidosis. It has been described as geneticist nightmares. Dahil nightmares, nagudagod sila kay until dugay kay na nadabalaan nga kana daay ang sakit, no? Nga kana daay no type 2 diabetes na naaday problema ang ato ang insulin. Yan. Okay, so next class. So, ang voice lang na idri kay si Ervin, siya lang ang nag-clap, clap, clap. Okay, no. Okay, so let's move on. It has a milder symptoms as compared to type 1. However, untreated type 2 diabetes will result to non-ketotic hyperosmolar coma due to overproduction of glucose greater than 300 mg per dl accompanied by severe dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, and increased BUN and creatinine. Alam niyo ba, class, no? That there are instances, class, pag less than 50 mg per dl, good ang glucose level nato, magkaroon tayo ng comatose. So imagine, class, makomatos ta, class, pag masubraan ta og glucose level. Pag masubraan pud ta og makulangan, pag masubraan less than 50 mg per dl, makumatos. Pag makulangan less than 50 mg per dl, makumatos. Pag greater than 300 mg per dl pod, possible nga makumatos. So in short, tama lang yun dapat ang ato ang sugar level sa atong katawan. Okay? Yan, okay, yan, no? Dito na state na ketonic hypersmolar coma due to overproduction of glucose greater than 300 mg per dl. Pero mas delikado, class, pag mababa ang glucose. Kaya ang bantayan ninyo, pag may mga relatives, class, no, na dili ma-monitor ang glucose level, so please monitor their glucose level, no? Less than 50 mg per dl, possible magkakaroon tayo ng coma. Okay? So next, recommendation. It is recommended that adult ages 45 years old. Mostly, class, no, ang atong mga papa, mama o papa. So, it's recommended, please inform your parents, no, atong mga ginikanan nga 45 years old and above, na dapat, class, magpa-test na daw tayo, no? Screening test for diabetes must be every 3 years, but screening should be performed earlier and more frequently if the individual is at high risk. Advice, class, yung mga parents na may diabetes, class, halimbawa ikaw, may parents ka diabetes, 21 years old ka na and above, please, pwede na tayong magpa-test sa ating sugar level. Okay? If your parents is 45 years old and above na, class, you can advise your mapa, pwede magpa-test siguro ta sa laboratory, no? Para mabalaan natin kung diabetes ba ta o dili. In order for us, class, to prevent those complications just like your diabetic nephropathy, neuropathy, and retinopathy. So, possible na dili nakakita atong lolo-lola, no? Dahil sa taas ng sugar, nephropathy, makomplicate na ang kidney niya, and neuropathy, there are possible na makalimutin na tayo. Okay? So, please advise your parents and your relatives. Pag 45 years above na, please, adto na mo sa clinic or laboratory para ipatest ang ilang sugar level. We have also another form of diabetes class, the gestational diabetes, manifests in pregnant women, usually transient in diagnosed during later half of pregnancy. Some develop type 2 diabetes mellitus, characterized by impaired ability to metabolize carbohydrates, usually caused by deficiency of insulin. Placental lactogen class inhibits action of insulin, risk of intrauterine death of fetus, neonatal complications, macrosomia, hypoglycemia, hypocalcemia, polycythemia vera, and hyperbilirubinemia. Class ito. Question ko, bakit kaya tumataas ang glucose level sa mga pregnant women? Okay? Nang dahil class, ini-inhibit kasi class ng hormone, placental lactogen. Okay? Yung placental lactogen class, inhibit niya ang productions ng ating insulin. So, meaning hindi na ma-absorb ng ating body ang ating glucose. Okay? So, that's the reason why kailangan magpapatest ang ating mga pregnant women. Okay? So, girls, pag kayo ay mabubuntis, okay, I have a question. At what certain weeks, no? Ilang weeks ba of gestation pwede na magpa-test for oral glucose tolerance test ang mga buntis? Paki-comment sa ating comment section ang tamang sagot. Ilan ba na weeks, okay? Weeks of gestation na pwede na magpapatest okay? So, screening should be performed at how many weeks, okay, of gestation? Okay? Sige. Okay, sabi ni Matthew, 26 to 28 weeks. Okay, sige. Sino pang may mga sagot dyan? Okay, class, please comment naman kayo dyan, no? Please comment naman. Okay, class. Okay, sabi ni Laika, third trimester. Ilang weeks ba yung third trimester, Laika? Okay? Class, ilang weeks? Okay, yung question ko is weeks, hindi trimester. So, convert nyo na in one month meron tayong 4 weeks, right? So in third trimester, meaning hapit na third trimester, ang trimester every 3 months. 24 to 28 weeks, okay? Yan, don't forget 24 to 28 weeks. Dapat class dapat huwag kakalimutan class at screening test should be done between 24 and 28 weeks of gestation. 1 hour glucose challenge test during 50 or using 50 grams per glucose load or 75 grams of glucose load. And a plasma glucose concentration of 140 mg per day or greater requires a full diagnostic glucose tolerance test of 3-hour glucose tolerance test with 100 grams of glucose. But right now, class, wala na tayong available na 100 grams of glucose. You can use already 75 grams of glucose or oral glucose tolerance test. There are option either 2 hours oral glucose tolerance test or 3-hour of glucose tolerance test. Pag 3 hours class, ginagamitan class ng 100 grams of glucose. Pag 2 hours oral glucose tolerance test class, ginagamitan niya siya class ng ginagamitan niya siya class ng 75 grams. Alam niyo ba class pag OGTT class, no? Dili lang dugo ang ginakuha, pati ihi. Oh. So imagine ka sa timing mo jud mo nga dapat makaihi gyud ka during that time. Okay? 'Di ba? Grabe, hassle kayo. Kailangan gyud mo makaihi. So yung pugson jud nimo nga mangihi gyud ka. Kay ngano man dili lang dugo ang pati ang imo ihi. Results class kani. Yan. FBS greater than or equal to 95 grams mg per day. After 1 hour, FBS equal to dugo. Di pa ito katong glucose after 1 hour taas. After 3 hours ibaba. That is the ideally, no? Ideally, mo na dapat ang result para normal. Pero pag tumaas siya, that is this is a indication that you have a gestational diabetes mellitus. GDM is diagnosed if two plasma values or more of the above mentioned glucose level are exceeded. Okay, what do you mean by this? Okay, ano bang ibig sabihin nito? Wait lang ha, I think hindi ko na-share ang presentation. Yan, okay, marinig na ba ang boses ko? Marinig na ba ang boses ko? Marinig na ba ako? Hello? Hello, mic test. 1, 2, 3. Marinig na ba? Marinig, can you hear me? Can you hear me, class? Can you hear me? Hello, mic test. Marinig niyo ba? Marinig niyo ba? Marinig niyo ba? Yan, okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay? Class, ganito yun siya, class, ha? Ganito yun siya, class. Okay? Class, pag ang value ng 1 hour is 180 mg per dl, pagka second hour class, nahimo na siya 200. Meaning there are instances na possible na na-kay gestational diabetes. Okay? Next class. After giving birth, women with GDM should be evaluated 6 to 12 weeks postpartum. GDM converts to DM within 10 years in 30 to 40% of cases. Yan. So class, that's the end of my presentations. Yan. Okay. So class, tapos na talaga ang presentation ko sa inyo, class. Class, I have a question for you. Do you want to have some review questions? If dili na ninyo gusto, class, so let's end our discussion. Pero kung gusto pa ninyo og review questions and some saan itawag oy kanang mga case analysis, okay? Case analysis. So mag-continue ta, okay? So I want you to write if you want the review questions. Ito naman class if and our class. Yan, okay? Okay, so gusto ko sa pwede mag-lunch na, sir. Okay, you can lunch. Okay, you can start lunch. Okay? Sige, if you want to have some review questions, madali lang man to nasa I think mga 10 questions lang ata to siya. Okay? May klase pala kayo 12 p.m. Okay, so let's end na lang our discussion, no? Okay, so that's the end of our presentation, class, no? That's the end of our presentation. So next meeting ko na lang i-discuss tong ating ating review questions, no? Ito na lang, class, bago ako mag-end class, no? I have a case study class na inyong sagutan. Madali lang talaga to, class. Kasi lalabas kasi ito sa inyong exam or sa inyong mga quiz. Okay. So, pakisagutan na lang ninyo, class, itong ating case study, class. No? Isa lang to, class, no? Isa lang to, class. Yan. Laboratory tests are performed on a postmenopausal woman, 57-year-old female, as part of annual physical examination. The patient's causal plasma glucose is 220 mg per dl, and the glycated hemoglobin HbA1c is 11%. Based on this information, how should the patient be classified? A. Normal glucose tolerance. B. Impaired glucose tolerance. C. Wala tayo na share. Share ba na ako? Yan. Pakisagutan na lang, pakisagutan. Okay, yan. ABCD lang. Plus the correct answer. No? Normal random sugar should be less than 200 mg per dl. Is A1C reference rate is 4 to 6%. The probable diagnosis is type 2 diabetes. Congratulations, class. The correct answer is letter D. Okay, so that's the end of our discussion. Class, thank you so much for listening. And I hope you enjoy our discussion. Even pressure na mo. Gipang kapoy na mo. So you are performing glomerulogenesis right now. Matthew, can you hear me? Can you lead us a closing prayer, Matthew? Okay. Hello, Matthew. Marinig mo ako?
Hello, sir. Yes, sir.
Yan. Okay. So, can you lead us a closing prayer?
Okay, sir. Sige, sir. Let's let us pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, thank you for this very beautiful morning. Thank you for a very productive morning. We thank you for all the things that we have learned, for our teacher, and for our classmates. We pray that you open our hearts and minds to more knowledge to come and protect us from everything, Lord. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen and amen. Okay, class, before we end our discussion, class, lahat ng mga reporters, class, please prepare 10 questions. Send it to me later than this night, okay? Mga before 12 midnights, class. Especially carbohydrates reporter, please send to me 10 questions, multiple choice. Send it to my messenger so that plus next meeting, we will have a quiz before we start our discussion, okay? Lipids reporter, please prepare for our next discussion. Lipids, next meeting. And bago tayo mag-end class, no? Thank you so much for listening. And sa mga hindi pa naka-like sa ating video, please click the like button now. Okay? So thank you so much and bye-bye. So the same kahapon class, ha? Ilagay nyo sa ating notepad ang ating mga questions. Okay? So any question class? Okay, so kung wala ng question, isulat naman dyan sa ating comment section, hashtag RMT o 2022. Yan. Yes, naka-notepad pa rin. Okay, so thank you so much for listening. Okay, God bless you all. Enjoy your enjoy your clinical immunology and serology. Okay? So just enjoy. Huwag kakalimutan i-memorize ang tanang mga principles sa clinical immunology and serology. So huwag niyang kakalimutan yan, class, kasi yan yung pinaka-importante sa inyong exam. Yung mga principle talaga ng immunology and serology. Okay, yung mga methods, just like mga competitive immunoassay, yan, dapat alam niyo yung principle na yan. Okay, so huwag niyo kakalimutan yan. Yung mga HLA, okay, so di ba yung mga HLA natin, mga histocompatibility, so nandyan yan sa immunology and serology. So please don't forget that. Okay, so thank you so much for listening. God bless you all and enjoy your lunch. Bye-bye. See you next meeting.